Welcome, to the Cursed Hour, where every whisper in the dark, every creak in the floor, might be something watching threes. If you found this channel, you're already part of the curse. The empty barbecue. The city's hum was a distant pulse. My apartment a cage of silence. Each notification from the dating app, a flicker of hope or danger. I was around 21 at the time and female, still fairly new to my city. I scrolled through profiles, my heart bruised from a breakup, my mind foggy with loneliness. I had just gotten out of a bad relationship, wasn't in the best place mentally, and didn't know a lot of people in town besides my ex and his friends. The app promised connection, a chance to rebuild, but each match felt like a gamble. I was on a dating or hookup app, looking for people to hang out with casually, maybe find an F.O.B or something. Then came Simon, 25, his profile a mix of charm and mystery. His messages, sporadic but warm. I had matched with a 25-year-old guy, Simon. We talked sporadically in the app for a few days. He spoke of his band, his life in a shared house, his music a gritty rock blend I didn't love but respected. He explained that he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. He sent me their music. His YouTube link showed a grainy image of guys jamming, one resembling him, but the views were low. His band manager story shaky. It was just an audio on YouTube with a heavily edited still image of 4 or 5 guys playing rock instruments. But one of them looked like him. I brushed it off. His vibe more dreamer than threat. He seemed to be like a nice enough guy. Then he vanished. His silence a sting I ignored. He stopped replying for a few days, and I figured that was that, and moved on. Days later, a message pinged at work. An apology. An invite to a barbecue at his place. One day I was at work and got a message from him saying sorry that he'd been so busy and inviting me to a barbecue with his friends and bandmates in the yard. The idea of a party, new faces, maybe friends, tempted me despite my nerves. I figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends, since he made it sound like a pretty big party. I checked the address. A suburban neighborhood. Safe, family-friendly. I put the neighborhood that he gave me into maps, and it was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. But doubt lingered. I barely knew him. I did tell him that I wasn't overly comfortable with the idea, since I didn't really know him well. I told him I'd stay outside. No house, no risks. I said that I would stop over for a bit if I didn't need to go inside the house at all. He agreed, easing my fears, and I stayed sober to avoid needing a bathroom. He said that that was totally fine, which made me feel a lot better about the whole thing. The train's rumble carried me toward a choice I couldn't unmake. The train station's platform was a sea of strangers. My eyes scanning for Simon, my heart a drumbeat of nerves. I sent Simon a message to tell him that I had arrived at the train station, and after I looked around I couldn't find him. I messaged him, my fingers cold, the app's glow my only anchor. I let him know when I was leaving for work and what time the map said the train would get to the station. He replied, late, telling me to walk toward the neighborhood. He told me that he was running behind and to just start walking toward the neighborhood. I hesitated. The parking lot vast, empty, my steps echoing as I moved. I was about halfway across the massive train station parking lot when I saw him slowly wandering toward me. Then I saw him, bell-bottoms, long hair, a figure from a faded photo, but wrong. I recognized his clothes wearing bell-bottoms when they were not common, especially for men, and long hair from far away. Up close, his face was older, weathered, a decade beyond the 25-year-old in his profile. Up close, His face looked pretty different from his photos. He kind of looked a little bit different, older looking than the 25-year-old guy in the photos by maybe to 10 years. My stomach twisted, a red flag waving, but I rationalized it. Bad photos, rough life, no big deal. I brushed it off. Maybe he's just self-conscious. Maybe he smokes a lot and doesn't wear sunscreen. He was drunk, his breath heavy with beer, his grin sloppy but familiar from my ex's crowd. He was also clearly already drunk, but a lot of my ex's friends were heavy drinkers, so that didn't seem too strange to me. I followed him, my unease growing. The neighborhood's quiet streets too still. We arrived at the front door. I reminded him that I wasn't comfortable going inside the house. At the door, I repeated my rule, no house, but he waved it off, saying we'd pass through to the yard. He assured me that we would just have to walk through to get to the backyard. I relented. The logic sound. The houses too close for a side path. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where you could just walk around the house to get to the backyard anyway. So it made sense. Inside, he locked the door. Deadbolt. Knob. A habit. I told myself. But my skin prickled. He immediately closed the door and locked the deadbolt and the knob behind me. He offered a tour, his pride in the house insistent, my refusal weak. Simon told me that he'd really like to give me a tour of the house. I politely declined. I agreed, my gut screaming, my past with liars dulling my instincts. He insisted that it would be quick. Not the wisest choice I know, but I was pretty good at explaining away red flags. The house was wrong, too neat, too middle-aged. Not a band's crash pad. The decor in the common areas was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast, and not a bunch of guys in a band. I clung to the hope of the barbecue, my escape. The house's silence was a trap, its neat decor a lie. Simon's tour, a leash tightening around my freedom. The bedroom doors were all closed. The bathroom was unremarkable. Each room was pristine, a showroom for someone else's life, not a band's chaos. I didn't know if this should make me feel better or worse, to be honest. I followed him, my steps heavy, his drunken chatter a mask I couldn't trust. He was the tall, lanky type who can run fast, even if they're out of shape, and smoke a pack a day. In the kitchen, I saw it. No barbecue, no food, no party, just an empty yard. He then showed me the kitchen, and I finally saw through the window that there was no body in the backyard. My heart sank, his lie exposed, my voice sharp. I asked him where everyone was and why he lied about the barbecue. He mumbled about bandmates on tour, van trouble, a party soon. He told me that his bandmates were on tour. Still, they were just running behind due to van trouble. I pressed. Why wasn't he with them? His answer nonsense. I asked him why he wasn't on tour with them if he's in the band. I don't even remember what his answer was. Panic rose, my mental excuses crumbling, his lies too blatant. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. I played along, my voice steady, suggesting we wait outside. I suggested that we go sit in the yard while we wait. He refused, his agitation growing, his eyes narrowing. He started to get agitated that I wanted to leave already. He offered a beer, his hand too close, my refusal firm. He offered me a beer, and I said no thanks because I had to work in the morning. He cracked one, his grin forced, pushing a tour downstairs. He wanted to take the tour downstairs. I could see from the top of the stairs that the basement was the dark and creepy kind. The basement stairs loomed, dark, narrow, a place I wouldn't go. I refused. I asked if we could go back outside, and he said after the tour. I lied about spiders, my phobia a shield, his frustration a warning. I tried to argue about going into the basement, told him that I have a spider phobia, that I don't like basements. He insisted, his voice sharp, my fear a knot in my chest. He started to get agitated about my reluctance, so I figured that it would be better to just let him show me the dang basement. I followed, my plan to escape forming, my hope pinned on the yard. I hoped that once he was done with the tour, we could go outside, and then I would just leave. The basement's dim light hid dangers I couldn't yet see. The basement's gloom was a cage, its shadows hiding truths I wasn't ready to face. Simon's grin, a predator's mask. The basement was fairly unremarkable, to be honest. A couch TV elliptical, a couch, a TV, an elliptical, normal. But wrong in this house's lie. I noticed something that really gave me chills. You see, the house was probably built in maybe the 1990s. Then I saw it. A door. Heavy. Foam-lined. Like a cold storage vault. I saw a door that looked just like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house. It was out of place. A relic from a darker purpose. Its lock outside only. The kind that only opened from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors on commercial walk-in fridges. Simon opened it, calling it a soundproof music studio. He opened it and told me that it was their soundproof music studio. Inside, guitars, amps, mattress toppers on walls, no drums, no recording gear. I looked inside from a few meters away. It did indeed look soundproof, and I could see a few guitars and amps in it. He urged me in, his hand motioning, his voice too eager. He insisted that I got inside to get a better look. He was standing outside the door, motioning for me to go in. My instincts screamed. Death waited in that room. I realized that I could totally die here if I'm not careful. I turned, running up the stairs, his footsteps close. I turned around and ran up the stairs. He closed the door and followed me. He called after me, feigning confusion, his act crumbling. He followed me, asking what's wrong, acting like I'm being all unreasonable. Upstairs, I faced locked doors. A maze I didn't know. His presence a threat. The front and the back doors were both closed and locked, so if I tried to run, he'd be able to get to me. I calmed my voice, pretending trust, my mind racing for escape. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him, in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit. We sat, his beer can sweating, his joint lit, my refusal weak. He offered me some, and I said no thanks. He insisted, so I took the smallest puff. I faked a cough, claiming inexperience, his gullibility my lifeline. I pretended to cough excessively and told him that I'm a novice, so that was more than enough for me. He suggested a movie, his hand too close, my refusal sharp. He asked if I'd like to watch a movie until his bandmates get back. I pushed for outside, my voice desperate, his agitation rising. I suggested we go for a walk or visit the park, ideas that he did not like or appreciate. I was trapped, my escape a faint hope. His lies a noose. Simon's anger was a storm, his lies a prison, my every word a step toward freedom or doom. He started to get angry again and sternly reiterated that his bandmates should be home any minute. I kept talking, my voice a shield, my fear a weight I hid. I tried to calm him down again with generic small talk. His fridge was empty, his beer gone, his rage spiking. Simon went to the fridge to get another beer and pulled out an empty box. I seized the chance. Suggesting we buy more for the party, I suggested that we get some more beer for the party because I was out of ideas. His eyes lit up, his suspicion dulled by the promise of drink. His eyes lit up with the possibility that I could actually be down to drink with him, and so he agreed. We walked to the liquor store, my heart pounding, my plan forming. As we were walking to the liquor store, I still didn't really have a plan. He insisted I go inside, his grip on my arm too tight. He insisted, though, that I had to go inside. At that point, I was so stressed and frazzled that I just went with him. I named a beer, my voice flat. The cashier's indifference a missed chance. He asked what kind of beer I wanted. I reminded him that I had to work tomorrow and didn't want to drink too much. Outside, the parking lot was empty, my hope fading. I hoped that there might be somebody in the parking lot, though, who might help me if I made a bit of a scene. Unfortunately, there was nobody. I suggested a drugstore for a toothbrush, implying I'd stay. A lie to buy time. I told Simon that I had to go and buy a toothbrush or something that vaguely implied that I might stay over. He tried to follow, but I claimed beer wasn't allowed inside. I told him that you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I don't even know if that's true. He believed it. Waiting outside, his eyes tracking me through the window. He eagerly agreed to this, but tried to follow me into the store. I told him that you're not allowed to bring beer into a drugstore. I wandered the aisles, my heart racing, his stare a weight. I must have wandered around the store for at least half an hour, and this guy is still just standing there, staring in the window. I waited for a group, friendly faces at the till, my escape within reach. I ended up hovering around the tills and waited until a big group of friendly-looking people were paying. I followed them out, my voice loud. "Leave me alone. Go home." I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly. He turned, his retreat anticlimactic, my freedom a miracle. Simon looked at the people getting in their car, who were now paying and looking at us because I had nearly yelled at him, and then he just turned around and left. I ran to the station, my breath ragged, his profile gone by nightfall. The train's rumble faded into memory, but Simon's shadow clung to me, his lies a weight I couldn't shake. I literally ran to the station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house and from the store. I sat on the platform, my breath ragged, the city's lights a blur through my tears. I never heard from him ever again. When I got home, his app profile had either been blocked or had been deleted. His profile was gone, a ghost in the digital void. But his face, older, wrong, burned in my mind. Up close, his face looked pretty different from his photos. He kind of looked a little bit different, older looking. I checked the app obsessively, fearing he'd reappear. His messages a trap I'd barely escaped. I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. My apartment felt unsafe, its locks flimsy, my sleep broken by nightmares of that soundproof door. I saw a door that looked just like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room in my grandma's house. I moved, a new place with better security. But the city's streets held his echo. I was no longer comfortable just walking away from this menace in this weirdly desolate suburb. I avoided the app, its notifications a trigger. My trust in strangers shattered. I was on a dating or hookup app looking for people to hang out with casually. I confided in a coworker, her eyes wide as I recounted the empty yard, the locked door. There weren't even barbecue supplies around, no burgers thawing on the counter, no cocktail supplies lying around. She urged me to report him, but I hesitated. His name likely fake, his house a mystery. All I really had was a likely fake first name and a general idea of where this house was, which probably wasn't even enough. I searched online, forums for scams, stories of men like Simon, finding chilling parallels. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. Women spoke of lures, parties, promises leading to danger, some never escaping. I was smarter now, don't worry, but I started trying to figure out a way to get out. I dreamed of the basement, that door locking behind me, my screams muffled. He opened it and told me that it was their soundproof music studio. I woke, my heart racing, vowing to never ignore my gut again. I realized that I could totally die here if I'm not careful. I joined a support group, women like me, their stories a mirror to mine. I figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends. They taught me strength, but Simon's ghost lingered, a warning I carried. Years later, after I stopped compartmentalizing the whole thing honestly, I wish that I would have reported him. The city's pulse was a threat, each stranger a potential Simon, my freedom a fragile thing I guarded fiercely. I was grateful that I made it out that day, even if I made a lot of poor choices. I avoided suburbs, their quiet streets now sinister, my walks confined to crowded city centers. It was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. I changed my number, my social media locked, my past a secret I buried. I was embarrassed of my choices too, and I just wanted to move on from the whole thing. I dreamed of the liquor store, its empty lot, my desperate plan to escape. I walked with him to the liquor store, and when we got there, told him that I didn't need to go inside. Simon's stare through the drugstore window haunted me, his patience a predator's. This creep didn't even have his phone out, and every time that I checked if he was still there, he was just staring. I woke, my breath short, his bell-bottoms a detail I couldn't erase. I recognized his clothes wearing bell-bottoms when they were not common, especially for men and long hair. I joined self-defense classes, my body learning what my mind hadn't. Trust no one. I wasn't overly comfortable trying this inside the house. My trainer, a woman with scars, saw my fear, her nod a silent understanding. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him, in the hopes that he'd chill out a bit. I told her about the house, its decor too perfect, its lies too deep. The decor in the common areas was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast. She suggested I map the neighborhood, find the house, but I couldn't, my memory blurred by panic. I had a general idea of where this house was, which probably wasn't even enough. I searched property records, hoping for a clue, finding nothing but dead ends. I wish that I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again with somebody else. I dreamed of the basement door, its lock a trap, my screams lost. The kind that only opened from the outside, it was just a smaller version of the big metal doors. I woke, my resolve hardening. I'd protect myself, others, if I could. I ran to the station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house. I joined a forum, sharing my story anonymously, warning others about men like Simon. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. Their replies, similar tales, different names, chilled me. A network of near misses. I was smarter now. Don't worry, but I started trying to figure out a way. I was alive, but Simon's shadow was a scar I'd carry forever. The city's nights were mine again, but Simon's ghost lingered, a lesson carved into my instincts. I guess that I'll never really know any more than I do now, and maybe that's for the best. I walked with purpose, my keys a weapon, my eyes scanning every face. I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I avoided apps, Their promises tainted. My connections now face to face. Vetted. I was on a dating or hookup app, looking for people to hang out with casually. I dreamed of the drugstore, its aisles my refuge, Simon's stare, a prison. I must have wandered around the store for at least half an hour, and this guy is still just standing there. I woke, my heart steady, my escape a victory I clung to. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I joined a women's group, their stories a tapestry of survival, my voice among them. I figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and maybe even make some female friends. I told them of the house, its locked doors, its empty yard, their nods a bomb. The front and the back doors were both closed and locked, so if I tried to run, he'd be able to get to me. I searched news archives, hoping for crimes linked to that suburb, finding nothing. I wish that I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again. I dreamed of the basement, its door a tomb, my breath trapped. I saw a door that looked just like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room. I woke, my resolve firm. I'd warn others, even if I couldn't find him. I realized that I could totally die here if I'm not careful. I posted warnings online. My story, a beacon for others. Their thanks await. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. I met a detective, off duty, her eyes kind but sharp, urging me to report. I was embarrassed of my choices too, and I just wanted to move on from the whole thing. I gave her what I had. Simon's fake name, the neighborhood's blur. All I really had was a likely fake first name and a general idea of where this house was. She promised to look, but her sigh told me it wasn't enough. I had a general idea of where this house was, which probably wasn't even enough. I walked the city, my fear a guide, my strength a shield. I ran to the station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house. Simon was gone, but his lesson was mine forever. The city's heartbeat was my own, its dangers a map I'd learned, Simon's shadow a guide I'd outgrown. I was grateful that I made it out that day, even if I made a lot of poor choices. I moved again, a brighter apartment, its windows open, my life no longer a cage. I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I avoided quiet streets, their silence a trap. My routes now bustling, safe. It was a suburban area with lots of families as far as I knew. I dreamed of the liquor store, its cashier's indifference, my missed chance. I regretted not asking the liquor store guy for help at this stage. I woke, my regret fading, my survival a triumph. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone. I joined a volunteer group, teaching women safety, my story a tool. I figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and make some female friends. I told them of Simon, his lies, the house that wasn't his. He explained that he was in a band and living in a house with his bandmates. They listened, their stories echoing mine, our strength a bond. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him, in the hopes that he'd chill out. I searched for the house online, satellite maps blurring, my memory failing. I had a general idea of where this house was, which probably wasn't even enough. I found a forum post, a woman describing a similar man, a different city. I wish that I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again. I messaged her, our stories aligning, her escape a mirror. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. We shared warnings, a network against predators like Simon. I was smarter now. Don't worry. but I started trying to figure a way out. I dreamed of the basement door, its lock a threat, my breath free. The kind that only opened from the outside. It was just a smaller version of the big metal doors. I woke, my fear a memory, my strength a fire. I realized that I could totally die here if I'm not careful. I spoke at a workshop, my voice steady, my story a shield for others. I told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly. The city was mine. Simon's shadow, a lesson I'd mastered. I ran to the station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house. The city's light was my armor, its crowds my shield, Simon's memory a scar I wore with pride. I was grateful that I made it out that day, even if I made a lot of poor choices. I walked its streets, my head high, my instincts sharp, no longer a stranger. I was extremely relieved to be out of that house. I avoided apps, their risks too great. My friends now real, their faces known. I was on a dating or hookup app looking for people to hang out with casually. I dreamed of the drugstore, its aisles my salvation, Simon's stare a fading threat. I must have wandered around the store for at least half an hour, and this guy is still just standing there. I woke, my heart calm, my escape a story I owned. I followed them out of the store and immediately told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I led a safety class, women like me, their eyes eager, my voice a guide. I figured that I might be able to overcome some social anxiety and make some female friends. I told them of the house, its lies, the door that could have been my end. The decor in the common areas was obviously chosen by a middle-aged Martha Stewart enthusiast. They nodded, their stories weaving with mine, our survival a shared strength. I pretended that I was okay with hanging out with him, in the hopes that he'd chill out. I searched for Simon's trace, a fake name, a ghost in the city's sprawl. All I really had was a likely fake first name and a general idea of where this house was. I found a news story, a man arrested, his description close, but not him. I wish that I would have reported him or something. It bothers me to wonder if he tried it again. I shared it online, my warning a ripple, hoping to save another. I started trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. I dreamed of the basement, its door open, my freedom alight. I saw a door that looked just like the heavy foam-lined door to the cold storage room. I woke, my fear gone, my strength aflame. I realized that I could totally die here if I'm not careful. I spoke at a rally, my story a call to action, my voice unbroken. I told Simon to leave me alone and go home. I said it firmly and loudly. The city was my home. Simon's shadow a lesson I'd turned into power. I ran to the station, which thankfully was in a different direction than his house. The woman on the frosted bridge. The winter road was a ribbon of ice, its silence broken only by the hum of my tires. But the air held a weight that made my skin prickle. I was no stranger to late-night drives. The empty highways, a familiar companion after long shifts. It was nothing unusual for me. This was actually my weekly routine. In fact, I was used to these late-night drives. The cold sharpened the world, the stars above stark against a moonless sky. It was winter, and the roads were pretty empty though. I pushed the gas, the speedometer climbing, the thrill of solitude urging me on. I was driving at around 90 to 120 kilometers an hour. But as I approached a bridge, the air thickened, a fog rising from the river below, curling like fingers across the road. The air near the water was more foggy due to the underwater. I eased off, the car slowing, my headlights cutting through the mist. I slowed down a bit, dropping my speed to about 38 km/h. That's when I saw her, a figure in white, standing alone on the bridge's edge, her silhouette ghostly against the frost. A woman dressed completely in white, just standing on the side of the bridge alone. The fog wasn't just mist, it moved, alive, as if it knew her, swirling around her like a shroud, daring me to look closer. I gripped the wheel, my instincts screaming to keep moving. I'm not one of those people who does stupid things in situations like this, so stopping wasn't even on my mind. I wasn't the hero type, not for a stranger in the middle of nowhere. But for some reason my car just suddenly gave out on its own. The engine sputtered and died, the dashboard going dark, leaving me stranded in the fog's embrace. I froze for a second, completely startled by this. My breath caught as I noticed her arms cradling something. A child, small and still. That's when I noticed that she was actually holding a child in her arms. Against all reason, I lowered my window, the cold biting my face, and called out, my voice unsteady. I rolled down the window and asked, "Do you want to go somewhere? Are you okay?" She didn't speak, her head tilting slowly, her eyes hidden in shadow. She didn't answer. She just stood there. Then, her hand rose, pale and deliberate, pointing toward the river below, its waters black and silent. Slowly raised her hand and pointed down toward the river below. The bridge creaked under an unseen weight, the fog tightening its grip, as if time itself had paused to watch what I'd do next. I shouldn't have looked, but my eyes betrayed me, drawn to the child in her arms. That was when I made the mistake of looking at the child. Its face was wrong, bright red, not flushed, but glowing. Its features blurred in a way that defied nature. All I can say is that his face was bright red. And I mean, it's hard to explain it in words, but it was not normal. It wasn't human. Not in any sense I could grasp. Its gaze locking onto mine with an intelligence too old for its form. I even wonder if it was even human. Fear surged, a primal instinct that snapped me awake. My mother's old advice echoing, spit, to ward off evil. My mom's old advice flashed through my head, and I did it exactly that. I spat in that direction. I spat toward them, my hands fumbling for the key, and the car roared back to life. I slammed my foot on the accelerator and drove as fast as I possibly could. I floored it, the bridge vanishing in my rear view, refusing to glance back. I didn't look back, not even once. The road stretched on, the fog thinning, but the encounter clung to me, its details sharpening with every mile. To this day, I really still cannot explain what happened that night. Why had my car stopped? As if commanded by her presence. Why did my car stop like that? Why had I spoken, defying my own caution? Why did I even talk to her? Who or what were they? Standing sentinel on that bridge? Who was that woman and the child in her arms, or what were they? Is probably the better question. Her gesture toward the river haunted me. What lay beneath its surface? What exactly was she pointing at? As I pulled into my driveway, my hands still shaking, I noticed something glinting on the passenger seat. A small, silver locket, its chain tangled. Not mine. It hadn't been there before. I opened it, finding a faded photo of a woman in white, her face blurred, holding a child whose eyes burned red. The locket felt cold, heavier than it should, and I buried it in a drawer, unwilling to touch it again. The bridge stayed with me, a frozen moment where time had bent, where the fog had whispered secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I never drove that route again, taking longer paths to avoid the bridge, but the locket's weight lingered in my mind, a tether to that night. The fog had been more than weather. It had moved with intent, a living thing that knew her, that wanted me to see. I told no one, not even my wife, fearing the words would make it real. Yet, on quiet nights, I'd hear a faint hum, like the river's voice, and feel the child's gaze, its red face etched in my dreams. I wondered if the locket was a trap, a key to something waiting in the water, or a warning to stay away. I left it buried, but the bridge's shadow followed me, a reminder that some roads lead to place where the living don't belong, where the fog hides truths too terrible to face. Whispers from the depths. I lived in Union, Maine. For the first 14 years of my life in a beautiful blue farmhouse with a huge basement, backyard, and blueberry field. The house stood alone on a wind-swept hill, its peeling paint a testament to forgotten years. From the moment we arrived, I felt it, a weight in the air, like the house was holding its breath. The walls seemed to hum with secrets, and at night, I heard whispers, faint and fleeting, curling through the darkness like smoke. My mother called it my imagination, but I knew better. Something was alive in this house, and it wanted me to find it. The basement, forbidden by my mother's stern warnings, was the heart of it all. I resisted for years, but at 14, curiosity won. The basement door was a slab of warped wood, its rusted knob cold under my fingers. One blazing afternoon, with my mother in town, I grabbed a flashlight and pushed it open. The air that spilled out was thick with the scent of damp earth and something sharper, like rusted iron. I walked down the 13 stairs to the basement, and my feet hit the floor. The darkness was oppressive, swallowing the flashlight's beam. Stacks of firewood lined the walls, and an old boiler squatted in the corner, its pipes twisting like veins. Something moved. A shadow. Too quick. Too deliberate. My pulse thundered. A low hum, not human, not animal, filled the air, vibrating through my chest. I swung the flashlight, but the shadows danced just out of reach. I stumbled back, my sneakers squealing on the concrete. The hum grew louder, pressing against my skull, and I felt a tug. Not physical, but real, urging me to stay. I ran, heart pounding, and slammed the door behind me. The house fell silent, but the memory of that hum lingered, a warning I couldn't shake. The basement wasn't just a room, it was a gate. The next day, the house felt different, darker, even in sunlight. My dog, Rusty, growled at the basement door, his hackles raised. I remember walking around the area barefoot and actually stepped on a nail. I screamed in pain and wobbled my way up the stairs. My mother found me, blood pooling on the kitchen floor. We bandaged up my foot, and I was sent outside to play, while my mom spent the afternoon sweeping up the basement. But the blueberry field, once a place of joy, now felt wrong, its edges blurring into a haze that made my skin crawl. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd brought something up with me. That night, the whispers returned, sharper now, weaving through the house's creaks. I lay in bed, frozen, as the air grew heavy, pinning me to the mattress. My eyes flicked to the corner, where the shadows pulsed like a heartbeat. A shape formed, not human, but a distortion, rippling like water. It drifted closer, and my breath caught. The clock read 2:07 a.m. when it stopped by my bed, silent but suffocating. Then it vanished. I blinked, and I looked at the clock again, and it said "Dabu." I was asleep the whole time. I told my mom about it. Of course, but no one believed me. I needed answers. In the attic, I found a journal, its pages brittle and filled with scrawled notes about the house's past. A family from the 1800s had lived here, vanishing without a trace. The journal spoke of a ritual to appease what lies beneath, tied to the land itself. The word sent a chill through me. The basement wasn't just haunted. It was a prison. A few weeks later, I had just come home from school, and my mom wasn't home yet. I invited my friend Caleb, hoping his skepticism would steady my nerves. We avoided Ouija boards. Too obvious. Too risky. Instead, I showed him the journal. He scoffed, but followed me to the basement. The air was colder than before, the hum louder, more insistent. Halfway up the stairs, something shoved me, a force like a storm wind with purpose. We started to run up the stairs when I was pushed down them. Caleb reached the top, yelling for me to move. I scrambled up, hands shaking, and we fled into the fading daylight. The journal consumed me. It described a presence older than the house, older than Union, something that fed on fear and thrived in the dark. Objects moved on their own, keys sliding across tables, doors creaking open at night. The whispers grew clearer, forming fragments of words. Stay below mine. One night, I woke to find the basement door open, the darkness pulsing like a living thing. I didn't go down. I couldn't. I convinced Caleb for one last attempt, a ritual to banish the presence. We gathered salt, candles, and a silver pendant from my grandmother in the backyard under a moonless sky. We followed the journal's instructions, chanting words that felt heavy on our tongues. The air grew still, then erupted in a soundless scream, a pressure that nearly knocked us over. Things finally started to calm down after this, though, and they sort of went back to normal again. The whispers faded, and the house felt lighter. But I never returned to the basement. Some doors are meant to stay closed. The years that followed were quiet, but the house never felt the same. I pored over the journal, piecing together its secrets. The land had been a burial ground long before the farmhouse, a place where ancient rites were performed to seal something away. The basement was the focal point, a crack in the world where that something could slip through. I found references to others who'd lived here, families who fled, children who vanished, all tied to the basement's pull. Even now, years later, I hear the hum in my dreams, faint but persistent, calling me back. I moved away at 18, but the house still stands, its blue paint fading, its secrets buried. I wonder if the next family hears the whispers too. The dance of the unknown. The Cocoa Beach shoreline stretched endlessly before me, its waves a rhythmic whisper under a star-strewn sky. I sat alone, the sand cool beneath me, my thoughts adrift in the vastness of the night. The ocean's pulse was my only company, but the air felt charged, heavy with an unseen presence. I gazed upward, the stars a canvas of infinite questions, when a flicker caught my eye, a light, too swift, too strange to be human. It knew I was watching, and it wanted me to see. The light wasn't just a star, it was alive, darting through the heavens with a purpose I couldn't grasp. It buzzed like a trapped insect, its movements jagged, defying the smooth arcs of planes or satellites. My heart quickened, a primal instinct stirring as the light lingered above, its glow pulsing in time with my breath. Was it a drone? A trick of technology from the nearby launch station? Or something else? something that saw me as clearly as I saw it. The beach was silent, the moon's half-light casting long shadows across the sand. I could see every wave, every cloud, but the light was otherworldly. Its erratic dance a challenge to my reality. It seemed to taunt me, weaving patterns in the sky, each movement sharper, more deliberate. I stood, my eyes locked on its glow, my mind racing with questions. Why here? Why now? Why me? The light shifted, streaking toward the ocean, its speed impossible, its path a defiance of physics. I followed, my feet sinking into the sand, my breath shallow. The clouds above twisted, their shapes bending in response to the light's passage, forming spirals that pulsed like a living thing. My reality frayed at the edges, the world I knew bending under the weight of what I saw. This wasn't just a sighting, it was a connection, a dialogue with something beyond. I was alone, but not unseen. The light knew my gaze, its movements a performance, a display meant for me. It hovered over the water, its glow brighter now, a star plucked from the heavens. My skin prickled, a sense of being watched, of being known, overwhelming me. The ocean mirrored the light, its waves shimmering with an eerie glow, as if the sea itself was complicit in this dance of the unknown. I became fixed on the stars, and that's when I began noticing a light, a distant glimmer that moved too fast, too erratically for any plane. It seemed to be moving too fast for how high an altitude it seemed to be, its speed defying logic, its path a jagged buzz like a bee trapped in glass. It also had the common characteristic of a UFO, where it buzzed around like a bee rather than smoothly gliding through the air. At first, I clung to reason, assuming a high-tech drone from the nearby launch station. I assumed it must be a high-tech drone, as I knew that there was a launch station pretty close by. But that thought dissolved as the light danced above, its movements too precise, too aware. The beach was bathed in moonlight, the half-full orb bright enough to reveal every detail. The clouds, the waves, the empty shoreline, the moon being at least half full, and it was bright enough that I could clearly see the clouds. I sat up, my eyes locked on the light, its glow a beacon in the night. Once I gave it my full attention, it flew towards the ocean, where I had to sit up and stare above the water to continue watching it. It seemed to respond, its dance growing bolder, a silent challenge to my understanding. I felt it, a connection, a knowing, as if the light saw me, its presence a weight in my mind, a whisper of something vast and incomprehensible. The light wasn't just a phenomenon, it was a presence, a consciousness that pulsed in the night sky. It hovered over the ocean, its glow brighter now, a star plucked from the heavens and set free. I watched what I can only describe as a distant star-like light, only slightly bigger than the brightest star in the sky. Its movements erratic, a dance that defied the laws of motion. Buzz around quickly in a seemingly directionless way, but now it seemed to be showing off more and flying erratically. It darted in one direction, then stopped dead. A pause that seemed to mock my disbelief. It would go in one direction super fast and then make a dead stop. The clouds above reacted, their shapes twisting in response to the light's passage, forming spirals that pulsed like a living thing. I also noticed the clouds reacting to its flight and shifting and twisting along with its movement in a sort of DNA sort of shape. My reality frayed, the world I knew bending under the weight of what I saw. The ocean mirrored the light, its waves shimmering with an eerie glow, as if the sea itself was complicit in this spectacle. I stood, my feet sinking into the sand, my breath shallow, my mind racing with questions. Was this technology or something beyond? A glimpse into a realm I wasn't meant to see? The light shifted, its movements sharper, more deliberate, as if it knew my gaze. Its dance, a performance meant for me. This is the point of the story, where I can only say that my reality started to crack. It streaked across the sky, a horizontal blur 10 times faster than before, its speed impossible. The light was on the left side of the sky, and out of nowhere, it shoots across horizontally to the right at about 10 times the speed that it was moving before. As it reached a patch of clouds, it vanished, reappearing yards to the left, then right, jumping in rapid succession. As it reaches this small patch of clouds, I watch it teleport 100 yards directly to its left, then the same distance to its right about 8 to 10 times. It moved point to point, not flying, but blinking. A defiance of physics that left me breathless. It looked like it was jumping almost from point to point and not flying again. It makes a dead stop. My jaw dropped, my mind reeling. At this point, my jaw has dropped for the first time in my life. I was thinking, did I really just see that? The light paused, then repeated the act, as if to confirm my disbelief. For good measure, it does the same thing again. It seems almost as if it actually hurt me. It flies back to the left side of the sky, shoots across, and teleports again. I was on my feet now, my reality shattering before my eyes, the world I knew crumbling under the weight of this impossible display. Now I'm on my feet though, as my reality is breaking before my eyes. A man approached, leaving the beach, his presence a fleeting hope for validation. A man leaving the beach starts coming near me though, and I think perfect, maybe someone else is seeing what I'm seeing. I called out, desperate for confirmation. I get his attention, which he seems extremely annoyed by, and I say, "Are you seeing that thing flying around up there?" His response was dismissive, his eyes fixed on the ground. His response was, "Yeah, it's pretty cool, huh?" And walks off the beach, not even looking up from the ground as he says this. I felt foolish, isolated, my sanity questioned. Okay, great. So I am crazy, and now I look crazy. Easy to this random dad, is what I think to myself. The light vanished, its departure a blur, leaving me alone with my thoughts, my mind in chaos. I'm not certain what happened to the light after this, as I was pretty dumbfounded. The beach was empty now, the moonlight casting long shadows, the waves a relentless whisper. I walked toward the water, seeking clarity, but the night had more to reveal, a truth that would push me further into the unknown. The ocean's rhythm was a steady pulse, but the night had shifted, its calm a facade hiding something profound. I stood on the ridge above the shoreline, the sand cool beneath my feet, my mind still reeling from the light's impossible dance. The moonlight bathed the beach, its half-full glow revealing every wave, every cloud. But the air was charged, heavy with an unseen presence. I was alone, yet not unwatched, the memory of the light's gaze lingering like a touch on my skin. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw them, two figures, emerging from the shadows, moving in a way that defied reason. Their approach was silent, their forms indistinct, a blur against the ocean's backdrop. I noticed two figures coming from the left. They are directly in front of the shoreline. At first, I thought they were joggers, their pace steady. But something was wrong. At first, I thought it was just two people jogging next to each other. My eyes strained, searching for details, but found none. No arms swinging, no legs striding, no sand disturbed. As I'm focusing my eyes on them, I cannot seem to make out any body parts moving or well-definitive features. They were outlines, torsos and vague limbs, translucent against the waves, like apparitions cloaked in a shimmering veil. I can make out the outline of a torso and maybe legs, but I'm seeing right through them into the ocean, as if they have that sort of predator camouflage sort of thing. They were shorter than humans, their movements synchronized, a dance of eerie precision. They were the same size, but both shorter than the average human, moving in synchronicity with each other. They didn't walk, they glided, their forms hovering above the sand, leaving no trace. Seemed more like they were floating rather than walking or running, though they were moving at a jogging pace. The moonlight was bright, the night clear, yet they were undefined, their presence a violation of reality. It really wasn't that dark. I start to walk over closer as they pass in front of me slowly. I stepped forward, cautious, my heart pounding, unsure if they were human or something else, in case they were just joggers, as I didn't want to freak people out just approaching them in the dark like that. As I moved, they accelerated, their forms blurring, vanishing down the shoreline in seconds. When I take a few steps forward, they both pick up speed and go past me and out of sight within a few seconds. No sound, no movement, just a fleeting presence that left me frozen. No perceivable movements or sounds or anything, they just zoom away down the shoreline. My mind raced, grasping for explanations, military tech, hallucinations, anything to anchor me to reality. But the connection I'd felt with the light, the sense of being watched, was mirrored here. A presence that knew me, that wanted me to see. The beach was empty now, the waves a relentless whisper. But the night was alive, its secrets pressing against me. I stood on the ridge, the ocean stretching before me, its depths a mirror to the sky's mysteries. The lights dance, the figures glide. They were linked. A message I couldn't decipher. A truth that left me trembling. Was this a glimpse of another world? A technology beyond human reach? Or something spiritual? A communion with the unknown? The fear was visceral. A primal instinct that urged me to flee, to escape the gaze of whatever had found me. I turned back. My car, a distant refuge. The beach's silence, a weight I couldn't bear. The light, the figures, they had shown me something I wasn't meant to see. A crack in the fabric of reality that I couldn't unsee. My steps quickened, the sand slipping beneath me, the ocean's rhythm a fading echo as I left the shoreline behind. The night's secrets etched into my soul. The drive home was a blur, the road stretching endlessly before me, the ocean's whispers fading but never gone. My mind was a storm, the lights dance and the figures glide, replaying in relentless loops, each image sharper, more vivid than the last. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, the memory of their presence a weight in my chest. They had seen me, known me, their gaze a silent communion that left me shaken. Was it a trick of the mind? A fleeting hallucination born of solitude? Or had I glimpsed something real, a truth beyond the veil of my reality? The light had been no drone, its movements too deliberate, too aware. I cannot fully describe the feeling, but somehow I knew it knew that I was watching it. It had danced for me, its erratic path a performance, a challenge to my understanding. The clouds had twisted in its wake, their spirals a testament to its power, a force that bent the world around it. The figures, too, were no joggers, their forms too ethereal, their movements too synchronized. I don't see arms or legs moving, I don't see hair bouncing. I don't see sand being kicked up. Nothing. They were otherworldly. Their presence a violation of everything I knew. A glimpse into a realm I wasn't meant to see. I pulled into my driveway, the night pressing against the windows. Its silence a reminder of what I'd witnessed. The beach was miles away, but its secrets followed me, woven into my thoughts, a tapestry of fear and wonder. I couldn't shake the connection, the sense that the light and figures were linked, a message I couldn't decipher. Looking back on this whole thing, it is interesting to me that I saw these entities immediately after seeing the light. The light's dance had been a prelude, a signal that prepared me for the figures. Their glide a confirmation of the impossible. I sat in my car, the engine ticking as it cooled, my mind racing with questions. Was it military tech? A secret experiment from the nearby launch station? I still even consider the possibility that it was military tech, and the figures walking by were just cloaked people seeing who saw the test flight. But the connection I'd felt, the sense of being watched, was too profound, too intimate. The fact that I felt a mental connection between us makes me think that it was a spiritual or alien encounter. It had spoken to me, a silent, "Watch this," before shattering my reality with its teleportation. Its dance, a display of power I couldn't comprehend. The fear was visceral, a primal instinct that lingered, a shadow that followed me into my home. I swear to you that it felt like it communicated a "Hey, watch this," before blowing my mind with all the teleportation stuff. I locked the door. The click, a futile shield against the night's secrets. The memory of the figures glide, a constant in my mind. I also felt a presence, or I don't know, just pure fear after seeing those figures enough. So in fact, to immediately leave in my car. They had been more than shadows, more than technology, a presence that knew me, that wanted me to see. I couldn't sleep. The lights dance and the figures glide, replaying in my mind. Each image a question I couldn't answer. The beach was a portal, a place where reality had cracked, revealing something beyond. I researched UFO sightings, finding stories of lights and figures, of connections that defied explanation. Cocoa Beach wasn't alone. Others had seen, had felt, had known. But my experience was mine, a truth I couldn't share, a memory that would haunt me forever. The night had changed me, its secrets a burden I carried, a glimpse into the unknown that I couldn't unsee. I didn't return to the beach, but its presence lingered, a whisper in the quiet of my dreams, a reminder of what I'd witnessed, what I'd felt. The light, the figures, they were out there, watching, waiting, a dance of the unknown that I'd never forget. The days that followed were a haze, the beach's secrets woven into my every thought, a tapestry of fear and wonder I couldn't unravel. I went through the motions, work, meals, sleep, but my mind was elsewhere, trapped on that shoreline, caught in the light's dance and the figures' glide. The ocean's rhythm echoed in my dreams, its waves a relentless whisper, the moonlight a spotlight on memories I couldn't escape. I was changed, marked by the night, a witness to something I wasn't meant to see. I avoided the beach, its sands a portal to a reality I couldn't face. The light had been no illusion, its movements too deliberate, too aware, a consciousness that pulsed in the night sky. The figures, too, were no trick of the dark, their forms too ethereal, their presence too profound. I researched, desperate for answers, scouring forums and books for stories like mine, UFO sightings, humanoid encounters, mental connections. They were out there. Fragments of a truth I'd glimpsed. A puzzle I couldn't solve. The light's dance was a performance, a display meant for me. Its teleportation a defiance of physics that shattered my reality. The clouds had twisted in its wake, their spirals a testament to its power, a force that bent the world around it. The figure's glide was a confirmation, their synchronized movements a message I couldn't decipher. I felt their gaze, a connection that went beyond sight, a knowing that left me trembling. Was it a warning, a welcome, or something else? A communion with the unknown? I called a friend, needing to share, but the words felt hollow, my story too vast for speech. They listened, skeptical, their rationality a mirror to my own disbelief. But I couldn't unsee what I'd seen, couldn't unfeel the presence that had found me. The man on the beach, his dismissive words, haunted me, a reminder of my isolation, my sanity questioned. I wondered if others had seen, had felt, but kept silent. Their stories buried like the secrets of Papton's woods. I found a journal, an old UFO log from the 1970s, mentioning Cocoa Beach, lights in the sky, figures on the shore. The descriptions matched mine. Erratic movements, translucent forms, a sense of being watched. The author spoke of fear, of wonder, of a connection that changed them forever. I wasn't alone, but the knowledge was cold, a truth that offered no comfort, only questions. Why here? Why now? Why me? The night had left its mark, a wound that didn't heal, a glimpse into a realm I couldn't comprehend. I dreamed of the light, its dance a constant. The figures glide a shadow in my sleep. The beach was a threshold, a place where reality had cracked, revealing something beyond. I couldn't return, but its presence lingered, a whisper in the quiet of my dreams, a reminder of what I'd witnessed, what I'd felt. I didn't seek answers anymore. The search too vast, the truth too elusive. The light, the figures, they were out there, watching, waiting, a dance of the unknown that I'd never forget. I've had a lot of bizarre experiences, but the majority of them have been subjective in the way that I cannot say for absolute certain that they weren't something like a hallucination or whatever. But this was different, a truth I couldn't deny, a memory that shaped me, a connection that lingered in the quiet of my soul. The ocean still calls to me, its waves a whisper of that night, its stars a canvas of questions I'll never answer. Cocoa Beach is a memory, a wound, a truth I carry forever. The light, the figures, they're out there, their dance a mystery, their presence a promise and a threat, a glimpse into the unknown that changed me forever. The voice in the dark, the air in the bungalow turned thick, a stillness that pressed against the walls like a held breath. I lay in bed, the night wrapping around me, when a shiver crawled up my spine, not from the cold, but from something unseen. The farmhouse down the lane and the landowner's house across the field were dark, their windows blank, leaving our home isolated in the vast farmland. A presence lingered, heavy, watching, its intent brushing against my mind like a whisper I couldn't hear. The darkness beyond my window was absolute, the rural silence broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. My mother slept across the hall, my sister on the other side of the kitchen, their breathing a faint rhythm in the quiet house. But something else was awake, something that didn't belong. A faint pressure built in the room, a sensation of being observed. and my heart quickened. The walls felt alive, holding a secret that was about to break free. Something ancient and restless. I pulled the blanket tighter, my eyes fixed on the closed door, its wood a frail barrier against the unknown. The house creaked, a sound I'd grown used to, but tonight it carried a different weight, like footsteps pausing just outside. The isolation of the farm, miles from town, amplified my fear. No neighbor could hear. No help was near. A low hum vibrated through the floorboards, subtle yet insistent, as if the earth itself was warning me. Something was coming, and it knew my name. The hum grew into a pulse, a rhythm that matched my racing heart. I sat up, straining to listen, when the air split with a sensation, a voice, not heard with ears, but felt in my bones. It was desperate, aggressive, a cry that clawed at my soul, calling my name with a familiarity that chilled me to the core. I froze, my breath caught, as the sound seemed to emanate from the door itself, a disembodied force pressing against the wood. The house was no longer safe. It had become a prison for whatever hunted me. Minutes stretched into eternity, the voice fading but leaving a residue of terror. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't move. The darkness pressed closer, the voice's echo lingering, a promise of return. My mother's room was near, her presence a lifeline, but the hallway between us felt like a gauntlet. I knew I had to call out, to break the spell, but the fear of what might answer held me captive, a prey in my own home. Since I was the only witness of this, though, was heard by my mother as well. And if you knew this woman, you'd understand that there's not a chance that she was just playing along or anything like that. So we lived in a bungalow on a farm, a few miles out from the nearest town. The nearest buildings to us were the farmhouse, located further up a single-lane track, and the landowner's house, which was opposite us. But all the way across a field, the farmer was a single guy in his late 40s, and the landowners were an older couple who lived alone. So there's really no possibility that this was some random kid that I knew, who had decided to come all the way out in the middle of the night, somehow crawl into my home just to yell my name, and then crawl out without any noise and run off. Which my scientist stepdad decided is the explanation. Which drives me a little bit crazy, because it's just really stupid. And well, he's pig-headed anyway. I was around 14 at the time, living with my mother and younger sister who would have been 12. Her bedroom was on the other side of the kitchen, and there was a hallway between that and my bedroom. The kitchen door was shut, so it couldn't have been her. It didn't sound anything like her anyway, but the mother's room was diagonal across from mine over the hallway. I think her door was ajar, but my door was shut. The voice had been real, a sound that defied logic, and my mother's confirmation only deepened the mystery. And directly outside of my door, this voice yelled out. And it was in such a weird voice, like it sounded desperate and aggressive, and at the same time, almost familiar, but also like no voice that I'd ever heard. And I completely froze, because I was terrified. I lay there, trembling, my mind racing for an explanation. Someone sneaking in, a prank, anything. But the isolation of the farm made it impossible. The farmer across the lane, the old couple across the field. None could have reached us unnoticed. It was maybe 30 minutes later. I don't think that I waited a minute, but I called to my mother saying, "Mom, did you call me?" And she called back. No, but I heard it too, and at that I lost it. I just started bawling, and I mean, I've never been that scared. The terror was raw, a flood of emotions I couldn't control. It might be worth noting too that when she responded, there was an obvious difference in the volume. like I could tell that I wasn't confusing her voice with, well, whatever it was that had been, because she sounded a lot quieter and muffled with her being situated across the way where she was. My stepdad's rationalization, some kid sneaking in, felt absurd. A scientist's attempt to dismiss what he couldn't explain, the house layout, the shut doors, the distance to neighbors, all pointed to something beyond the mundane. I know that this contains a lot of random info in this story about the house and such, but these are all the details that I've gone over and over again looking for any mundane explanation. Years later, the memory softened, a strange comfort in its mystery. I can say with absolute confidence that this was a disembodied voice, and although it scared me half to death at first, I kind of find it comforting now because I'm always very skeptical, even of stuff that I've experienced. But this is one thing that I know for certain happened. It wasn't just in my head, and it definitely has no explanation. The voice, once a terror, became a beacon of possibility. I often think now that if a voice can come yelling out of thin air like that, which should be impossible, well then maybe anything is possible, and that thought, it gives me a lot of hope, honestly. The night of the voice changed me, a crack in the armor of my skepticism. I lay awake for weeks after, listening to every creak, every whisper of wind, waiting for it to return. The bungalow, once a safe haven, now felt like a stage where the unseen played its part. My mother and I spoke of it in hushed tones, her face pale, her belief unshaken that it was no dream. My sister, oblivious on the other side of the kitchen, slept soundly, unaware of the entity that had breached our home, the isolation of the farm, miles from town, amplified the mystery. No footsteps, no shadows, just a voice that pierced the night. I began to notice patterns, subtle shifts in the house's atmosphere. The air grew heavy before bed, a pressure that made my ears ring. The hallway, a narrow passage between my room and my mother's, became a threshold, a place where the ordinary met the unknown. I'd leave my door cracked open after that night, a silent challenge to whatever had called my name, hoping to catch a glimpse, a sound, anything to unravel the enigma. My stepdad dismissed it, his scientific mind clinging to logic, but his explanations felt hollow against the memory of that voice. The farm itself seemed complicit, its fields stretching into darkness, its lanes empty of life. The farmer, a solitary figure, and the old couple across the field, their windows dark, offered no answers. I'd sit by my window, scanning the night, imagining a figure creeping through the grass. But the voice had come from within, not without. My mother suggested it might be a spirit, a lost soul tied to the land. And though I resisted the idea, it lingered, a possibility that gnawed at my doubts. The comfort I found later was in that uncertainty, a belief that if the impossible could happen, then hope could too. The voice became a thread in my life, a story I told sparingly, met with disbelief or curiosity. My friends at school laughed, my stepdad scoffed, but my mother's nod, her shared terror, kept it real. I grew to see it as a sign, a break in the fabric of the world that suggested more than science, more than reason. The bungalow, with its shut doors and quiet halls, held a memory that shaped me, a reminder that some truths defy explanation. And in that defiance, there lies a strange, enduring hope. The unseen terror in the woods. The forest was alive with secrets, its shadows twisting under the faint beam of our flashlights. At 13, my friends and I were fearless, drawn to the woods near our campsite like moths to a flame. We'd built a hut there, our own slice of adventure, hidden by towering pines and a small, glassy lake. But that night, the air felt different, thick, charged, as if the trees were watching us. We trekked through the dark, our laughter echoing, unaware of what waited beyond the firelight. A chill ran through me, not from the cold, but from something primal, urging me to turn back. Our group of 5 was smaller than usual, but the familiarity of the path kept us bold, until a sound stopped us dead. It wasn't the wind or a branch snapping. It was something alive, something that didn't belong. We were on a camping site and there was a woods nearby, and we always went there with like 12 other people or so. This time, it was just us. Me, Jake, Sarah, Tom, and Mia headed to our hut, a rickety shelter we'd been perfecting for years. We made a hut there. There was also a small lake that we could fish at. The lake's edge shimmered under our lights, its surface unnaturally still. The year before, we had already made some progression making the hut, and nothing really went wrong. We'd spent nights there, swapping stories, dodging pranks from a friend who loved to scare us with his music box. There was always a guy in the night who wanted to prank us using this music box and playing scary sounds. But this night felt off. The usual playfulness replaced by a weight we couldn't name. We reached the hut, dropping our bags and gathering sticks for a makeshift roof. We were just doing the standard stuff, collecting sticks, making a what we called roof. Laughter filled the air as we hunted for branches shaped like guns, our flashlights dancing across the trees. But an hour in, a noise cut through our chatter, a low, guttural sound, like a growl from deep in the earth. We heard a really scary noise. We laughed, assuming it was our prankster friend, and FaceTimed him, demanding he stop. We FaceTimed him and told him to stop joking around, but he was allegedly at his tent. His confused face on the screen sent a chill through us. The chills everyone had was unreal. I hushed the group, and we stood frozen, the silence stretching longer than it should. It was silent for longer than 30 seconds. We tried to shrug it off, moving deeper into the woods. But 5 minutes later, the night shattered. We heard the most gut-wrenching screech that we'd all ever heard. It wasn't human, not even animal, just a raw, piercing wail that clawed at our nerves. It was not human-like, too. Panic surged, and we bolted toward the abandoned campsite we'd found the year before, a forgotten stretch of cracked pavement and rusted fire pits. Near the woods, we found a part of a camping ground that seemed to be abandoned. I'd always found it fascinating, but now it felt like a trap. We moved to the abandoned part of the campsite, huddling in the dark, whispering that it was nothing, just a trick of the mind. But the woods weren't done with us. We heard the bushes start to crack like somebody was around, and something big was in there. The sound was heavy, deliberate, circling us. We lived in an area with no bears, no large predators. We live in an area where really there are no bears or anything that should be making a noise like that. A deer, maybe. But the weight of those steps, the way the air seemed to thicken, said otherwise. We stayed where we were, and we didn't do anything. For 30 minutes, we sat paralyzed, flashlights trembling, until we couldn't take it anymore. We all decided to run together. We sprinted back to the main campsite, branches snapping underfoot, our breaths ragged. When we got back, we promised that we would never return to the woods at night ever again. Morning revealed the truth. We came back to our tents and everything was torn into absolute shreds. Sleeping bags were ripped, coolers overturned, clothes scattered like confetti. The destruction was methodical, not the work of wind or animals. We stood in stunned silence, the screech still echoing in our minds. It's really hard to come up with an explanation that explains well all of it. We packed up and left, vowing never to speak of it. But the woods stayed with me. I researched the area later, finding whispers of missing campers, strange lights, and sounds no one could explain. Some said the abandoned site was cursed, tied to a tragedy long forgotten. Others spoke of something older, something that hunted in the dark. Years passed, but the fear lingered. I avoid forests now, their silence no longer inviting, but menacing. My friends drifted apart, but when we meet, we don't talk about that night. The hut's probably gone, reclaimed by the trees, but I wonder if it's still there, waiting. To this day, it's really hard to come up with an explanation. Was it a prank gone wrong? A creature we couldn't name? Or something tied to that abandoned place? I keep a flashlight by my bed, its beam a weak defense against the memory of that screech. The woods are out there, vast and silent, hiding whatever watched us that night. And I know I'll never go back. The stare of malevolence. The wind howled through the streets of downtown Oklahoma City, biting at Clara and her girlfriend Mia as they hurried toward the historic hotel. The night was frigid, the air sharp enough to sting their faces, but it was nothing compared to the chill that awaited them inside. The hotel's lobby, once a grand bank, gleamed with polished marble and ornate chandeliers, but its opulence felt hollow in the dim light. Clara's boots echoed on the floor as they crossed the threshold, the warmth of the bustling upper level a stark contrast to the eerie stillness near the valet entrance. A man stood alone by a pillar, his figure half-shadowed, his head bowed as if lost in his phone. Clara barely noticed him at first, her focus on reaching her mother's room. But then, a sharp sound cut through the silence, his phone hitting the marble floor. He didn't move, his hands frozen in place, as if the phone were still in his grasp. Clara's eyes flicked to the fallen device, then back to the man. That's when she saw it. His face, twisted with a hatred so raw it stopped her breath. His eyes locked onto hers, burning with a malevolence that felt like a physical blow, as if she'd trespassed into something forbidden. Mia grabbed Clara's arm, urging her toward the elevator, but the man's gaze followed, heavy and unrelenting. The lobby, once a place of grandeur, now felt like a trap, its shadows hiding something far darker than either of them could comprehend. My girlfriend and I had a brief but deeply unsettling experience in the lobby of a historic hotel in downtown Oklahoma City. Clara, 24, and Mia, 25, had spent the evening at an OKC Thunder game, their spirits high from the excitement. It was bitterly cold and windy outside, and we had just returned from an OKC Thunder game heading to the hotel where my mother was staying. The hotel, a restored relic of the First National Bank, was a masterpiece of marble and gold, its grandeur a nod to a bygone era. This hotel occupies the old First National Bank building and has been painstakingly restored to reflect its original opulence. The floors are polished marble, the decor lavish, evoking a sense of grandeur from a bygone era. The upper level buzzed with life, guests checking in, the clink of glasses from the restaurant. But the lower lobby near the valet was a different world. In the middle of the lobby stands a staircase leading to an upper level, bustling with activity. A check-in desk, a restaurant of warm lighting, and the hum of conversation. But in the lobby by the valet, The atmosphere spare was starkly different. It was cold, still eerily quiet. Clara's attention was drawn to a man leaning against a pillar by the staircase. And that was when I noticed him leaning against a pillar by the staircase was a man. He appeared to be looking down at his phone, holding it in both hands as though texting. She barely registered him until his phone slipped, hitting the marble with a sharp sound. My glance was brief at first, until the phone slipped from his grip and hit the marble floor with a sharp crack. Strangely, he didn't react. His hands still poised as if holding the device. But he didn't move. His hands remained suspended in the same position, as though he was still holding the phone. Confused. Clara wondered if he was asleep or disoriented. Confused. I thought that maybe he had fallen asleep standing up or something. Her gaze shifted to the phone on the floor, then back to his face. My eyes darted to the ground with a phone, lay then back up towards his face, and that's when I saw it. His eyes were fixed on her, filled with a hatred so intense it felt unnatural. He was staring directly at me, and the look on his face was pure disgust. Not the kind of anger that you see when somebody's been wronged, but something far darker, hollow and malevolent. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, almost inhuman, that made her skin crawl. His eyes burned with a rage so intense that it literally sent a shiver down my spine. It was the kind of look that makes your stomach churn, the kind that makes you instinctively want to look away. Clara turned away, her heart pounding, and pulled Mia toward the elevator. And so I did. Trying to shake off the unease, we waited for the elevator. But curiosity gnawed at her, and she glanced back. When it finally arrived, curiosity got the better of me, and I stole a glance back toward the pillar, and he was still there, still staring. His gaze was a weight, pressing against her as they stepped into the elevator. His gaze bore into me like a physical weight, and I hurriedly stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on that unnerving scene. In her mother's room, Clara asked if she'd seen the man, but her mother hadn't noticed him and dismissed it as drug-related behavior. When we reached my mother's room, I asked if she had noticed the man, and she hadn't. And when I explained what had happened, she brushed it off and said that he was probably on drugs. Mia, however, had felt the same chilling stare. My girlfriend, though, had seen him too. She didn't see the phone drop, but she caught that look, the same expression of pure disgust directed at us. After a brief visit, they returned to the lobby, Clara's nerves on edge. After a few minutes, we left to head back to our car. As the elevator doors opened, her heart raced. As the elevator door slides open, my heart raced. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. She caught sight of him, still by the pillar, still staring. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him. He was still there still staring. Mia confirmed she'd locked eyes with him too, his expression unchanged. My girlfriend confirmed it later that she had locked eyes with him too, that same expression of disdain. As they hurried through the lobby, Clara stole one last glance through the glass doors. As we walked out of the lobby and down the sidewalk, I couldn't resist one last glance back through the glass doors, and now he had turned. He was fully facing us now. He was facing them now. His eyes tracking their every move, his face a mask of cold, calculated malice. His eyes locked onto mine, as if following us out into the night. His face, it was chilling. Psychopathic even. It wasn't just uncomfortable. It was wrong. Something about it felt deeply, instinctually threatening. The moment they turned the corner, Clara and Mia broke into a sprint, their breaths visible in the freezing air. The hotel's lights faded behind them, but the weight of that stare lingered, as if it could pierce through the darkness. They reached their car, fumbling with the keys, and locked the doors, their hearts pounding in unison. The street was empty, but Clara kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that face in the shadows. They drove in silence, the memory of the man's gaze burning in their minds. Was it drugs, as Clara's mother suggested? A mental break? Or something more sinister? Something that didn't belong in the warmth of that restored lobby? Back at their apartment, they sat up late, recounting the encounter, trying to make sense of it. The man's face was etched into Clara's memory. Those hollow eyes, that unnatural hatred. It wasn't just a look, it was a warning, a glimpse into something she couldn't understand. Days later, Clara called the hotel, asking about the man behind the pillar. The staff claimed no one matching his description had been there that night. The security footage showed nothing but an empty lobby. Clara and Mia exchanged uneasy glances, wondering if they'd imagined it, or if they'd brushed against something far darker than they could ever explain. They never returned to the hotel, choosing to avoid downtown altogether. The moment that we turned the corner, we instantly broke into a sprint, running to our car and locking the doors as soon as we got inside. Thankfully, the man didn't follow, but his presence haunted them. Thankfully, he didn't follow us, but even now, hours later, the memory of that face, it lingers, and I'll never forget it. Clara wondered what drove that look. Was it drugs, mental illness, or something else? So what do you guys think was going on? Drugs, mental illness, or was it something else more sinister? The question lingered, unanswered, as the memory of that night became a shadow they couldn't shake. Clara and Mia grew cautious, avoiding late-night outings and always checking their surroundings. The hotel, with its gleaming marble and grand staircase, was no longer a place of elegance, but a reminder of an encounter that felt like a brush with something malevolent. The head at the door, the bedroom doorframe pulsed with a shadow that wasn't mine, its edges alive in the dark. It all started with me when I went to go to bed, and whenever I was lying down, these hands would start popping out of the doorway to the bedroom. Each night, as I settled under the covers, hands, pale, claw-like, slipped from the frame, reaching as if to crawl into my world. It would always happen in the corner of my eye. They vanished when I looked. A trick of light, I told myself. But my heart raced. I would tell my family about it, and while they did believe me, nevertheless, they really hadn't witnessed anything for themselves. My parents nodded, sympathetic, but their eyes held doubt. No one else saw it. They weren't too sure what I was talking about. The house felt heavier. It's quiet, a mask for something watching. I checked the frame, the walls, finding nothing but dust. Sleep became a battle. My eyes locked on the door, waiting for those hands to return. The air grew thick, each creak a whisper of something older than the house itself. I whispered to my brother, his skepticism a wall, but I saw his glance linger on the doorway. The hands weren't just mine to see anymore. They were a secret the house kept, ready to share. The doorway's shadow deepened, its secrets no longer mine alone. The house's silence a lie. It was not until a while later where my brother would start seeing the same thing by the doorway. Except this time, it was a head. My brother froze one night, his voice low, describing a head, featureless, hovering, peering from the frame. I also started seeing it too, and we would affectionately name it the head. I saw it too, a vague shape, eyes glinting, gone when I blinked. We would affectionately name it the Head. We called it the Head, a nickname to tame our fear. But it grew bolder. It lingered longer, its outline sharper, as if testing our nerve. My brother's laughter faded, his sleep restless like mine. The house's walls seemed to lean in, listening. Its rooms colder despite the heat. I searched online, finding whispers of El Coco, a monster hunting sleepless children. I would eventually come across the urban legend called El Coco. Its name, meaning the head, chilled me. Too close to our joke. I looked up the meaning, and it loosely translates to the head. Was it folklore or something real? The head didn't feel like a story. It felt alive, watching, waiting for us to falter. The head's presence spread, its gaze a weight on our family, the house a stage for its game. The weird thing, though, is that it was soon that my mom also had seen it. Mom saw it at her care home job, a head in a dining room cutout. Fleeting, but real. She works at a care home next to her house, and one day she was in the dining room doing something. She thought it was a resident, but no one was there. There was this cutout next to the doorway, and when she was about to leave the room, she saw a head in this cutout. It vanished, quick as always, leaving her shaken. It was only for a second before it quickly moved out of sight, which is what it always does. She checked, finding empty air, her story aligning with ours. She walked to see if there was someone there, but obviously there wasn't. The care home's halls felt wrong after that. Her shifts uneasy. Back home, the head grew bolder. Its appearances no longer confined to night. The house's lights flickered, its air heavy with an unseen stare. I wondered if it followed Mom, or if it was everywhere, watching us all. The house held its breath, the head's game shifting, its rules unknown but relentless. I believe my dad has also seen it, but I can't remember the story that he told me, so I won't go into detail about that. Dad mentioned a glimpse, a shape by the door, but his words were vague, his unease clear. It doesn't seem like a ghost because of the way it tries to hide from us like it could get caught. It wasn't a ghost. It hid, sly, as if it feared being seen. From what I understand of ghosts, they can just disappear, right? Ghosts vanish. This thing lingered, teasing, a predator playing with prey. The house's corners grew darker, its silence a cloak for the head's movements. I checked the doorway, my flashlight shaking, finding only wood and paint. My brother's eyes met mine, our fear a shared secret. The care home's cutout haunted Mom's stories, its emptiness a mirror to our home. I researched El Coco, its bat-like ears a myth, but the head's gaze felt real, piercing. The house was no longer ours. It belonged to the head, its frame a portal to something we couldn't name. The head paused its game, its absence a taunt. The house's quiet a trap waiting to spring. A month or two ago, it either stopped showing up or we stopped paying attention to it because, well, we didn't see it again. For weeks, the doorway was empty, our sleep uneasy but unbroken. But then a few days ago, my other brother, not the first one I mentioned earlier, was hanging out in that same bedroom. Then my other brother saw it, low, near the floor, a head peering from the frame. Brother 2 saw something in the doorway in the corner of his eye, and he asked the other brother if it was me. He thought it was me, but I was elsewhere. The head usually pops up high above the doorway, but this time it was down low, so I don't know if it was the same thing. The head was back, its form shifting, its intent unclear. I guess that it's back again. The house felt alive, its walls watching, its air thick with dread. I asked online, seeking myths like El Coco, finding tales of lurking entities, none quite fitting. I just want to know what this thing is, I guess, and I know that it sounds unbelievable. The head wasn't a ghost. It was something else, hiding, waiting, and we were its game. The head's gaze lingered, its presence a riddle etched into our home, its silence a challenge we couldn't ignore. I just want to know what this thing is, I guess, and I know that it sounds unbelievable. I searched for answers, myths beyond El Coco, finding tales of shadow beings, tricksters that hid in plain sight. I'm wondering if you've ever heard of any myths or legends of something like this, or if maybe you've experienced something like this yourself. None matched perfectly, but their essence, watching, waiting, felt too close. It doesn't seem like a ghost because of the way it tries to hide from us, like it could get caught. The house grew restless, its doorways portals, its air thick with unseen eyes. I lit candles, whispered prayers, but the head returned, low, sly, unyielding. The head usually pops up high above the doorway, but this time it was down low, so I don't know if it was the same thing. My brothers and I shared stories, our fear a bond, our questions unanswered. Mom's care home felt tainted, her shifts haunted by that fleeting head. She saw a head in this cutout that she thought was one of the people that lived there. We stopped looking at the frame, but its shadow clung, a guest we couldn't banish. It was only for a second before it quickly moved out of sight, which is what it always does. I posted online, seeking others, their replies chilling, doorways, heads, things that hid. If you can provide me with any details, then I would be very thankful. The head wasn't ours alone. It was a hunter, and we were its prey. I faced the doorway, my voice steady, daring it to show itself, ready to meet its gaze. The man in the pinstripe suit. The house loomed like a giant skeleton, its sprawling room swallowing light, whispering secrets we were too desperate to heed. At 17, my mother and I had nowhere else to go, so when her boss offered this mansion for a pittance, we ignored the warnings. My mother and I moved into this giant house owned by her boss. It was at least 5 bedrooms, 6. If you repurposed to study, there were 100 red flags. But we were desperate, and the rent was cheap. The place was cavernous, its hallways stretching into shadow, its windows rattling like restless spirits. The day that we moved in, my mother's antique grandfather clock fell over in the U-Haul. The clock's ornamental spike, brass and gleaming, bent sharply, a white crease marring its surface. It had this ornamental spike on the top, and it was bent from the fall. It was brass or some kind of coppery metal, and a strong white crease formed where it had been. I tried to fix it, but it wouldn't budge without breaking. I had tried to right it, but I couldn't without snapping it off. We hauled it inside, its ticking uneven, and continued unpacking. We got it into the house and continued moving things in. By morning, the spike stood straight, the crease gone, as if the clock had healed itself. The next day, the spike was straight up with absolutely no crease or line where it had bent. The house felt alive. Its silence, a prelude to something watching, waiting. The air in that house wasn't just still. It was heavy, pressing against us, as if the walls resented our presence. That first night, the mansion awoke with a vengeance, its halls echoing with bangs and thumps, like footsteps racing through the dark, doors slamming shut. At first night, there was constant bangs and thumps, though it sounded like running down the halls with door slamming. Our Airedale, Rusty, barked frantically, his fur bristling at unseen threats. Our little dog, AED Terrier, kept barking and freaking out. I chalked it up to an old house settling, perhaps a loose shutter caught in the wind. I figured that it was an old house settling, maybe a loose shutter on the window. Banging, but the shutters were fixed, ornamental, unyielding. Turns out, though, that the shutters were all ornamental and firmly fixed to the outside. The noises never returned with such ferocity, but the footsteps persisted, a nightly ritual that left Rusty whimpering. The house, though, never made those noises again, though the walking down the halls continued frequently. The clock's ticking grew louder, its rhythm off, as if counting down to something we couldn't see. I began to notice the house's quirks. Doors creaking open an inch, lights flickering in rooms no one used. The mansion wasn't just old, it was aware. Its vastness a maze where shadows seemed to linger just out of sight, their edges sharp with intent. My dreams in that house weren't mine. They were invasions, pulling me into a darkness that knew my name. After a few months, nightmares took root, unlike any I'd had before. I started having some bad dreams. Usually I dream in third person, hopping narrative views between characters. I almost never dream about myself, but the nightmares that I had were first person. In them, I lay in my bed, the master bedroom, its darkness absolute save for moonlight. A man would be in the room near the door. No lamp, no outlets, just a pull cord light by the door, out of reach. There were no outlets in the room for a lamp, and the only actual light was a pull cord next to the door. I had no flashlight, no phone to light the way. This is before I had a cell phone, by the way. I somehow never thought that you get a flashlight with them. The man stood silent, his form vague, watching me. I couldn't see him well, and he just stood there by the door, by the light cord. I'd drift back to sleep in the dream, the terror fading, only to wake unsettled. Eventually, though, I would just sort of drift off into the dream, and well, then it would end. The dream recurred, not nightly, but often, a nagging presence I kept secret. I had this nightmare often, but not every night, nor even every week, but it definitely happened enough that it was a nuisance. Who would believe such a thing? I didn't say anything. Because, what kind of conversation is that anyway? The house didn't just haunt my sleep. It warped reality, making every shadow a threat, every sound a promise of worse to come. One night, the dream changed. The man no longer by the door, but beside my bed. His presence a weight on my chest. One night it all changed. He wasn't by the door. He was now standing right next to my bed. Moonlight revealed him, an older man in a black and gray pinstripe suit, a bowler hat perched on his head, his smile wide, teeth sharp and glistening. He was an older man, in a black and gray striped pin suit. He had a little bowler hat on, and his smile reached right across his face, sharp and glistening teeth showing. He spoke, his voice low and smooth, chilling me to the bone. "Don't worry, it won't hurt. I'll eat you when you're asleep," he said. "Don't worry. It won't hurt. I'll eat you when you're asleep." I woke, heart pounding. The morning light a weak shield against his words. The next thing that I knew, it was morning. I lied to my mother, claiming I wanted a room closer to the bathroom, hoping the man was bound to the master bedroom. I made some excuses and told my mom that I wanted to change rooms to be closer to the bathroom. I thought that if it wasn't a dream, the man was tied to the bedroom itself. I kept the dream secret. Fear silencing me. Of course, I said nothing about the dream. In the new room, the nightmares stopped, but the footsteps continued, a restless pacing that echoed through the night. Things went fine in the new room. I didn't have the nightmare, though there were a lot of late-night footsteps. The house's grip tightened, its presence seeping into our lives, culminating in a moment that broke our silence, which revealed nobody. At this point, I did start sleeping with a flashlight, by the way. A man's yells, loud and guttural, rang out, startling us over the TV, sending Rusty into a frenzy. A man was also heard yelling several times in the house, loud enough to be heard over the TV and send the dog barking. One night, I woke in pure terror, bolting from my room, only to stop, realizing nothing pursued me. I once woke up, suddenly, to pure fear, and I bolted out of the room. All of a sudden, I stopped halfway to the kitchen, realizing that nothing was following me. Christmas brought the breaking point. As we gathered in the living room, gifts strewn about. We had family over an open presents in the living room. My mother screamed, her gaze fixed behind the couch by the parlor doors. My mom looked over towards the couch and started screaming all of a sudden. We saw nothing, but her apologies couldn't hide her fear. She made a bunch of apologies and suddenly left the room. Later, she confessed seeing an older man in a pinstripe suit, a round hat on his head. There was a man standing behind the couch. He was older, and he was wearing a suit with gray or black pinstripes, and he had a little round hat. I revealed my dream, our shared vision binding us in dread. I then told her about the dream, and we both got pretty nervous about that. She changed rooms that night, and we never saw him again. But the house's other oddities, creaking floors, cold spots, persisted, a reminder of its hold. She changed her room that night too, to be closer to the bathroom. There were other oddities in that house after that, but we never did see him again. We moved out, and the house consumed others, none lasting a year, now standing empty, its clock still ticking, waiting for the next soul to claim. Echoes in the empty trailer. My brother and I moved out of our mom's house and got a place of our own. It was a single-wide trailer about 10 minutes away from where our mom lived. The trailer was nothing special, just a box of faded aluminum parked on a patch of scrubby grass, surrounded by pines that whispered in the wind. But from the first night, I felt it, a prickle on my skin, like the air was charged with static. The place had a pulse, faint but undeniable, as if it were watching us. I'd lie awake, hearing creaks that weren't from settling wood, sounds that seemed to come from inside the walls. My brother brushed it off, said old trailers were just noisy, but I knew better. Something was here, and it wasn't human. It was my first time being on my own like this, and there wasn't anything fancy about this place, just a typical trailer. But the storm door stuck occasionally. It groaned when you forced it open, a sound that carried across the quiet lot. One night, alone in the trailer, I stood in the kitchen, the smell of chicken wings and onion rings still lingering from dinner. I'd cooked for my brother, who was working late at his pest control job. I made dinner like normal. It was chicken wings and a mixture of onion rings and potato wedges that night, and had finished everything before he had ever made it home. I didn't eat right away. I never did. Instead, I stepped onto the back porch for a cigarette, the night air cool against my skin. Through the kitchen window, I saw movement, a flicker, not a shadow, but something solid, crossing the room. My heart skipped. The blinds were down, but the kitchen light was on, casting a glow that shouldn't have shown anything at all. I went out on the back porch to smoke my cigarette. There's a window where I can see into the kitchen from the back porch, but the blinds were shut. But I left the light on in the kitchen. As I exhaled, I heard this loud storm door and then footsteps inside. I froze, staring at the window. I looked towards the window. I saw a shadow walk by through the kitchen. My cigarette burned down to the filter. It had to be my brother. I told myself. I stubbed it out and went inside, calling his name. I noticed his bedroom door is still shut, and the light isn't on. The trailer was silent, empty. I opened the front door, and his truck wasn't even in the driveway. My stomach twisted. I'd heard that door. I'd seen something move, but I was alone. I searched every inch of the trailer. Closets, bathroom, under the beds. Nothing. I wasn't exactly scared, but more confused. I did get a bit of an uneasy feeling because I know that I heard the storm door and saw someone or something walk past the window. My brother got home 30 minutes later, finding me in the living room, staring at the wall. He noticed my confused demeanor. He asked what was wrong, and I told him what happened. He frowned, then admitted he'd seen things too, fleeting shapes in the hallway, always when he thought I was awake. He then tells me that he'll sometimes see a shadow in the trailer too, but always believed it to be me until he realizes that I'm in bed. I'm a loud snorer, so he knew it wasn't me. We sat in silence, the trailer's hum filling the space between us. Weeks later, I was watching my niece while she napped. I leave the tiny bags of chips on the counter, separated by brands but in neat rows, and she can grab one whenever she wants a snack. I was washing dishes, the counter behind me. That's when I heard a sort of light crumple sound and turned around, expecting to see my niece standing there with a bag of chips. But instead, I saw a bag on the floor about 3 feet away from the counter. She was still asleep, undisturbed. I didn't bump them, and I mean, they were a good distance away. The air or the ceiling fans weren't on. The doors and the windows were shut. No breeze or drafts either. The bag hadn't just fallen. It was too far from the counter's edge. I stared at it, my skin crawling, as the trailer's hum grew louder, like a heartbeat in the walls. I started digging into the trailer's history. The landlord mentioned an elderly woman who died there years ago, sick and alone. We've heard from previous tenants, and the landlord that some years before, an elderly lady had gotten sick and passed away in there. I wondered if it was her, lingering, restless. But the more I thought about it, the less it felt like a ghost. This was something else, something that didn't just watch, but acted, deliberate and cold. I found an old photo in a drawer, tucked behind some manuals. A woman, her face blurred, standing in the kitchen. The date on the back was decades old, but the trailer looked the same. I couldn't stop staring at her eyes, or where they should have been, just dark smudges, like they'd been scratched out. I moved out the following year because my brother had met a girl, and he had gotten her pregnant. They needed the space, so I left. Though it stung, they would occasionally come by and tell us of spooky things happening that still went on in that trailer. My sister-in-law saw shapes in the corners, heard footsteps when no one was home. They both would hear footsteps inside when they were outside. Once, they heard laughter, a child's giggle, sharp and out of place. Voices and giggling would be heard by one of them, while the other was not home. Kitchen cabinets opened overnight. Keys vanished, only to reappear in odd places. Sometimes the kitchen cabinets would be open, and they would always wake up to them like that. They blamed her pregnancy brain until the night they were watching TV. My brother would always put his work boots by the front door. A scuffing sound made them mute the TV, and one of his boots just comes flying into view and hits the wall by the TV. They bolted to their room, hearts pounding. The next morning, when he's leaving for work, that same boot is back by the door, but not in its normal position. The trailer wasn't just haunted, it was alive. I kept the photo, studying it for clues. A local historian told me the land had been a makeshift cemetery once, long before the trailer park. Not all the bodies were moved when the lot was cleared. Some nights, I dreamed of the trailer, its walls closing in, the hum turning into a voice that whispered my name. My brother and his wife moved out in 2024, relieved to escape. They finally moved out and were very thankful to leave that place. But I still wonder about that photo, those smudged eyes, and what stayed behind in that trailer, waiting for the next tenant to hear its call. The trailer stood empty for months after they left, its windows dark, its door silent. I drove by once, just to see it. The pines were still there, swaying in the wind, but the air felt heavier, like the trailer was holding its breath again. I didn't get out of the car. I didn't need to. The historian's words stuck with me, about the land, the forgotten graves, the things that don't rest. I started noticing small things after I moved out. Keys missing, a faint hum in my new apartment at night. I burned the photo, hoping it would break whatever connection lingered. But some nights, I still hear that hum, faint but persistent, like it's following me. The trailer's gone now, torn down for a new lot. But I wonder if the next tenants, in their shiny new homes, hear the whispers too. The shadow on the trail. The forest trail wound through the park like a forgotten promise. Its silence, a weight that pressed against my chest. I stood alone, my boots sinking into the soft earth, my pocket knife a cold comfort in my hand. The air was still, unnaturally quiet, as if the birds and waves of Lake Michigan had fled, leaving me with only my heartbeat. I'd come to geocache, to lose myself in the hunt. But now I felt hunted, a prickle on my neck warning me of eyes unseen. Somewhere in the trees, something watched, and it wasn't letting go. The park was supposed to be safe, far enough from the whispers of danger that haunted Grand Mire's trails. I'd chosen it for its seclusion, its promise of solitude. But now that solitude felt like a trap, the main path was a distant memory, my search for a geocache pulling me deeper into the woods, where the underbrush grew thick and the light dimmed. I paused, my breath shallow, the silence louder than any sound. Was I alone? Or was the forest holding its breath, waiting for me to notice? I scanned the trees, their branches clawing at the sky, their shadows pooling like ink. My instincts screamed, a primal urge to flee, but I stayed, rooted by defiance, by the need to prove I could face the wild alone. Then I saw him, a figure on the main trail, his gaze locked on me, his presence a violation of the quiet. Our eyes met, and the world shifted, a cold certainty settling in my bones. This wasn't chance. He'd been watching, and now he was coming closer. My hand tightened on my knife, its blade a silent vow to protect myself. I moved toward the main trail, my steps deliberate, my heart a drumbeat in my ears. The man was closer now, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, his intent unclear but heavy. I quickened my pace, the path narrowing, the forest closing in, its thorns and mud a barrier I couldn't cross. He was there, blocking my way, his smile a blade of its own, cutting through my resolve. I was a woman alone, my late 20s, no shield against the danger that pulsed in his gaze. The park was empty, its usual sounds, hikers, birds, waves, gone, replaced by a silence that screamed of wrongness. I needed to escape, to reach the safety of my car. But the man stood firm, his presence a wall I couldn't breach. The forest watched, its silence a witness to my fear, its shadows a cloak for whatever came next. I enjoy hiking and geocaching in my free time, a passion that drew me to this quiet park, its trails dotted with hidden treasures. I found a neat little park with my GOC cases hidden around the park, far enough from Grand Mere's dangers to feel safe. With my pocket knife in hand, about an hour into my adventure, I found myself a bit off the main trail, searching for a geocache. My focus sharp, but my senses alert. It was a very calm and quiet day that day. Usually you can hear other people walking around birds, animals. The waves from Lake Michigan, but I was met with an eerie silence their day. The quiet was unnatural, a void that amplified my unease. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, a prickle that grew into certainty when I saw him. I stood up and started to look around, my eyes locked with a man watching me from the main trail. His gaze was unyielding, his steps deliberate as he approached. Once our eyes met, he started to walk towards me, and I got this strange feeling that I needed to get out of there quickly. My instincts screamed, urging me to flee. But the path was narrow, the forest a maze of thorns and mud. Being a woman in her late 20s alone in the woods with a strange man watching me was definitely not ideal. I moved toward the main trail, my goal clear: distance, safety, escape. But he was there, a shadow that wouldn't let me pass. His presence a threat I couldn't ignore. The man's silhouette loomed on the trail, his presence a barrier between me and safety. My heart raced, each beat a reminder of my vulnerability, my knife a meager defense against the unknown. The forest was silent, its usual chorus of life: birds, waves, distant hikers, replaced by a void that amplified my fear. The path was narrow, flanked by prickers and mud, a trap that forced me to face him, to navigate his gaze, his smile, his intent. I needed to move, to escape. But every step felt like a gamble. The woods a witness to my struggle. I started walking back towards the main trail. My goal was to get some distance between the two of us. My steps were measured, my eyes fixed on the path. But he was there, blocking my way. He blocked the path, though, and tried to talk to me. His voice was calm. Too calm. A veneer over something darker. The path was surrounded by prickers and mud, etc., making it impossible to slip past without risking injury. The man began to talk to me, and he asked me if I was searching for mushrooms or if I had lost something. His questions were mundane, but his tone was wrong. His smile a mask that didn't reach his eyes. I answered, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. I explained to him that I was geocaching, but needed to get back to my car. I kept it brief, my words a shield, but he didn't move. The man then gave me a creepy smile and continued to block me from getting back to my car. His smile was a warning, a promise of something I didn't want to know. Finally, I was able to end our strange conversation, choosing to take another path, since he would not let me pass him. I veered off, the thorns snagging my clothes, the mud sucking at my boots, each step a battle against the forest's grip. As I started walking away, I looked over my shoulder to see him still staring at me, just watching me walk farther away. His gaze was unyielding, a weight that followed me, his silhouette a shadow in the dimming light. When I finally got back to the main trail, I stopped for a moment to look around to see if I could spot the man anywhere. The trail was empty, the forest silent, but the relief was fleeting. a false promise in a place that felt alive with threat. I didn't see him. I continued to walk back to my car, my steps quickening. The parking lot, a distant beacon of safety. The trail stretched before me, its curves hiding what lay ahead. The forest's silence, a cloak for danger. I moved faster, my breath ragged, my knife still in hand, its blade a silent vow. The parking lot was close, a quarter mile away, its promise of escape driving me forward. At this point, I can see the parking lot ahead of me. I only had maybe a quarter of a mile or so to the parking lot. But the forest wasn't done with me. Its secrets stirring in the shadows, its threat a pulse that matched my own. Then he reappeared, emerging from a side trail, his steps deliberate, his presence a violation of my fragile calm. This is when the man reappeared from a small side trail and started walking behind me. My heart lurched, my instincts screaming as his footsteps echoed mine. As I walked faster, his footsteps started sounding quicker. I glanced back, his figure closer now, a predator closing the gap. I looked over my shoulder again, and he was now about 200 feet away from me. I pushed forward, my pace frantic. The parking lot a lifeline I couldn't reach fast enough. I walked faster, checking on the man again. Now he's only 100 feet from me. He was gaining, his intent clear. The forest's silence, a witness to my fear. The park's history loomed in my mind. Whispers of attacks, of women harmed in these woods. Their stories a warning I couldn't ignore. Was he one of them? A shadow from those tales? Or something new? A threat born of this moment? I needed to escape, to reach my car, to break free from the forest's grip. But his steps were relentless, a rhythm that drove me toward panic. The parking lot was a beacon, its asphalt a promise of safety. But the man's footsteps were a relentless drumbeat, each one closer, louder, a threat I couldn't outrun. My breath was ragged, my knife a useless weight in my hand. The forest's silence, a suffocating blanket that trapped my fear. It was apparent now that he was trying to catch up to me, his pace deliberate, his presence a shadow that clung to me. The trail narrowed, the trees closing in, their branches a cage that held me in this moment, this danger, this fight for escape. Then my phone rang, a lifeline piercing the silence. My best friend's FaceTime call, a stroke of fate. In that moment, my phone started ringing. My best friend was FaceTiming me. I answered, my voice steady despite the panic, holding the phone up as if to show her the park's beauty. As I answered, I held up my phone as if trying to show my friend the park that I'd found. The man's pace slowed, his footsteps faltering, his gaze shifting as he realized I wasn't alone. Once the man realized that I was on the phone, his pace slowed instantly. I kept talking, my words a shield, my friend's voice a tether to safety. The parking lot now within reach. I made it back to the parking lot, and I get into my car. My hands trembled as I locked the doors, the car a fortress against the forest's threat. I noticed the man was lingering in the parking lot until I was fully in the car. He stood at the edge, his silhouette a specter in the fading light, his gaze unyielding. He slinked away towards a different set of trails until he vanished from my sight. I watched him go, his figure swallowed by the trees, the forest reclaiming him as if he'd never been there. A shadow born of its depths. I started the engine, my breath steadying. The car's hum a promise of escape. The park's history haunted me. Whispers of attacks, of women harmed in these woods. Their stories a mirror to my own. I'm wondering if anyone else has encountered a strange man around this area. their descriptions eerily similar to the man I'd faced. Late 20s or 30s, average build, dark hair, green eyes, a predator in plain sight. This park has had 2 semi-recent attacks, only 6 months apart. One incident included a female who was knocked unconscious and woke up hours later. She discovered that she was injured, and the other incident also included a female. She was attacked while walking her dog. The parallels were chilling, a pattern I couldn't ignore, a threat that lingered in the forest's silence. The drive home was a blur, the road stretching endlessly before me, the forest's grip loosening, but never gone. I couldn't shake the man's smile, his gaze, the way he'd watched me, a predator sizing up his prey. The park was supposed to be safe, a refuge from the dangers of Grand Mere, but it had betrayed me. Its trails a labyrinth of threat, its silence a cloak for fear. I researched the attacks, finding news reports that matched my experience. Their details a confirmation of the danger I'd faced, a truth that left me trembling. I didn't return to the park, its trails a memory I couldn't face, its silence a reminder of what I'd escaped. The knife stayed in my pocket, a constant now, its blade a vow to protect myself, to never be caught unaware again. The forest had shown me its shadows, a truth I wasn't meant to see, a danger that lingered in its depths. I shared my story online, hoping to warn others, to find others who'd seen, who'd felt, who'd survived, the man was out there, a shadow on the trail, a threat that didn't fade. I wondered if he'd return, if others would face him, if the forest would claim them as it nearly claimed me. My escape was luck, a call that broke the silence, a moment that shifted fate. The park was a wound, a place where safety was a lie, where shadows walked and watched, a truth I'd carry forever, a lesson etched in fear and survival. The blinding light, the night air hung heavy over the Kentucky farmland, a stillness that felt like a held breath, pressing against the windows of the bungalow. I sat with my half-brother, the house quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge, when a sudden chill swept through the room, not from the open door, but from something unseen. The fields beyond stretched into darkness, the farmhouse and landowner's house, distant silhouettes, their lights extinguished. A presence loomed, vast and cold, its gaze piercing the walls, stirring a fear I couldn't name. The rural quiet was shattered by a sensation, a pulse that vibrated through the floorboards, subtle yet insistent. My brother and I exchanged glances, the snacks forgotten, as the air grew thick, electric. The isolation of the farm, miles from town, amplified the dread. No neighbor could hear, no help could reach us. A faint glow flickered outside, too brief to catch, but enough to set my heart racing. Something was approaching, something that didn't belong to this world, and it was drawing closer with every breath. I moved to the window, my reflection a pale ghost against the glass. When the light returned, brighter, sharper, flooding the room with an unnatural white. It was as if the sky itself had opened, casting a beam that pinned us in place, its heat searing my skin despite the closed panes. The house trembled, a low moan rising from the walls, and my brother grabbed my arm, his eyes wide with terror. This wasn't a storm, wasn't a trick of the mind. Something alien was here, watching, waiting. The light pulsed, a rhythm that synced with my pounding heart. And then it was gone, leaving a void of silence that felt heavier than before. The room was unchanged, but the air carried a metallic tang, a residue of whatever had passed. I stumbled back, my breath shallow, as a shadow flickered outside. Not human, not animal, but a shape that defied form. The bungalow, once a refuge, had become a stage for an encounter beyond comprehension, and I knew we were marked. The aftermath lingered, a weight on my chest, as the house settled into an uneasy calm. The glow had left a scar, a memory etched into the wood. The glass, my mind. My brother whispered, his voice trembling, and I felt the same dread mirrored in his eyes. Whatever had come was not done with us. It had opened a door, and the threshold was ours to cross. The night stretched on, each creak a reminder of the presence that had invaded our home, a mystery that demanded answers. It was the summer of 1989, and I got to leave the Lotto Res and spend the entire summer with my half-brother. Same dad, different moms in Kentucky. I was 12. And he was WAP during this time. His stepdad was pretty cool and smart too. He was a nuclear physicist and always had an answer for everything. Not in a sarcastic way either, but in a genuine way, especially if it pertained to the natural world. My step-grandma was a nurse and worked a swing shift at 2 different hospitals. The poor lady not only worked like 16 hours a day, but also would come home to clean the house and cook large meals for everyone. Honestly, I felt really bad for her. Like on the res, my family all lived next door to each other, where my brother's family was. They were 2, so sometimes we'd go over and help out his grandma, cook and clean and all that. We even got started on firewood for her, because she'd often do that too. But we'd sometimes stay until she'd left for work, and then we would walk the field. Back home it was different there in rural Kentucky. The nights were darker, and the dark was quieter. And not that I couldn't be on the res, but there was always someone moving about there. I mean, sure, you could go out a lot further and reach the same level of dark and quietness on the res for sure. But I'm going to assume that you know what I'm talking about here. Occasionally, a passing car on the highway, or maybe a distant freight train would break up the monotony there in Kentucky. The encounter with the light had changed everything. A ripple that spread through the family. Now my brother's stepdad ended up getting cable TV one day, along with a movie channel. So we had made plans to sort of binge watch all the movies that we could. That Friday night with that grandma. Know that we would not be over that day. My brother even invited his friend over to spend the night. And we had gone to town earlier and bought all the snacks. Pizza potato chips, black cherry, strawberry cola and lemon lime, canned sodas, and plenty of candy if I remember right too. Escape from New York was going to be on that night. So we were pretty excited. The night was set for fun, but the air felt charged, as if the light had left a trace. Finally, Johnny Carson was over, and the adults were going to bed. No sooner had we got settled in. There was a loud knock on the door. My brother's step. Uncle Bill, his stepdad's brother, was at the door, demanding to speak with his brother. We asked if everything was okay, but he had this look of terror on his face and waved us off. Stepdad comes out, and his brother says, "We need to talk about Mom," so they step outside, and we're all trying to listen. But they took a walk. A few moments later, Stepdad comes in and gets dressed and says that he'll be back. He also had a look, but sort of one of disbelief, I guess you could say. The story unfolded, a tale of terror that explained Uncle Bill's urgency. Now here's what happened as it was known to us so well. That night, Grandma was going to work like normal, which was around 9:00 p.m. At night, she said that she had got a few miles down the road. Keep in mind that this is a rural road with little traffic, especially at night, when all of a sudden a bright, blinding white light shone over her car. She described it as intense and hot. It caused her to stall. The light was about 50 or so feet above her and never made a noise. She sat there, paralyzed with fear, until it left. Maybe about 10 minutes later, she was then able to start her car again, and she just went back home. She said that she tried to call her son, my brother's stepdad, but the line was dead, and so was able to call her other son, Bill. The aftermath was a shadow over the family. Bill and my brother's stepdad took turns driving her to work for the next few months until she got over the fear. And even then, she took another route for work all the time. But weirdly, she also said that a few days later, 2 men dressed in black ties came to talk to her. She said that they claimed to work for the government and showed badges and asked her a bunch of questions. And the whole experience, it really changed her personality. She went from like being warm and non-aggressive to being impatient and short with people, family included. But years later, she denied everything. Denied seeing anything or talking to anyone. My brother's stepdad believed Baylis that it was something military related, and she was threatened to not say or speak about it. Everyone tried to get her to see a therapist. I always thought that she acted that way because she felt violated. And well, that nobody would believe her. The strangeness didn't end there. A new layer of unease settling in. Shortly after that, maybe a year or so, I suppose shadow figures started being seen around the outside of her house too, and my brother's as well, where there wasn't any sort of paranormal activity before. And that was the last time that I was ever allowed over there. We did do a cleansing ritual when I got home, but my dad isn't into that sort of thing at all. So he never joined us. All he would say is that he knew that there was some bad Jew there, and that was it. The figures were vague, shifting in the moonlight, a silent watch that unnerved us all. My brother and I spoke of it in whispers, the snacks and movies forgotten, as the house felt less like a home and more like a target. The cleansing ritual, a mix of sage and prayers, brought temporary relief, but the sense of being watched lingered, a reminder of that blinding light. The family dynamics shifted, a rift forming where trust had been. My step-grandma's change was stark, her warmth replaced by a guarded edge, her eyes darting to the windows, as if expecting those men in black ties to return. My stepdad's theory of a military experiment gained traction, his physicist mind piecing together the silence of the light, the dead phone lines, the government's visit. I wondered if the shadow figures were its aftermath, a lingering presence left by whatever had hovered above her car. The farm, once a place of peace, now held attention, a story we couldn't escape. Years later, the memory of that summer lingered, a mix of fear and fascination. The shadow figures faded, but the questions remained. Were they connected to the light, to the men in black? My step-grandma's denial felt like a shield, a way to bury the violation she'd felt, but it couldn't erase the change in her. The cleansing ritual at home, led by my mother, was a small act of defiance, a reclaiming of our space. My dad's reluctance, his acknowledgement of bad juju, hinted at a belief he wouldn't admit. A crack in his skepticism that mirrored my own evolving hope. The blinding light became a family legend, a tale passed in hushed tones. It shaped my view of the unknown, a bridge between the rational and the mystical. The rural Kentucky nights, once a comfort, now carried a weight, a reminder that the sky could hold mysteries beyond our understanding. The hope I found was in that uncertainty, a belief that if such a light could descend, then perhaps other wonders awaited, hidden in the dark. Echoes of the empty house. The old house creaked under its own weight, its 250-year-old bones whispering secrets I could never quite hear. Growing up in a 4-story terrace on a bustling UK street, I was used to its quirks: the uneven floors, the drafty windows, the faint hum of traffic outside. But there was something else, something alive in the walls, that stirred when the world grew quiet. At 15, I felt it most, a presence that seemed to know my name, calling me when no one was there. My bedroom on the 2nd floor was my sanctuary, but even there, the air could turn heavy, charged with an unseen gaze. That day, reading alone, I heard it, a voice that shouldn't have been, clear as day, pulling me into the unknown. The house, once a grand manor split into terraces, held centuries of stories, and I was about to become part of one. What was it that lingered here, mimicking those I loved? And why did it want me to listen? I was up in my bedroom reading when the silence broke. I heard someone come in downstairs, the door opening, closing, and keys rattling. My mother's voice echoed up the stairs. "Hello," she shouted. "Come downstairs because they needed to talk to me about something." It was odd. She usually just shouted whatever news she had. I asked why, and she shouted back, "Just come downstairs," in a sort of frustrated tone. I set my book down, assuming I was in trouble, and descended the stairs, my footsteps loud in the quiet house. I got downstairs and quickly became confused though because I couldn't find them anywhere. I called out, even checked the cellar, a place we rarely went, but silence answered. I thought that I must have been imagining it though, and started to walk back upstairs when my brother's voice stopped me cold. My brother shouted down from his room asking me what Mom wanted. I replied, asking if he'd heard her too, but got no answer. I climbed to his room, heart pounding, only to find it empty. I opened his door and he wasn't there either. It was then that I got this weird chill sensation and goosebumps. The house felt wrong, its familiar corners alien. I hurried downstairs, trying to make sense of it. When the back door opened, my mom suddenly walked in with the dog. I demanded to know where she'd been, but she looked baffled, insisting she'd been out walking for an hour. She assured me that she had not been back at any stage. My dad was at work, my brother at a friend's house. My brother. Well, he was allegedly at his friend's house. The realization hit like a wave. Whatever called me wasn't my family. I kept it to myself, but the house never felt the same. Its walls seemed to listen, waiting for me to let my guard down. Years later, at 20, it happened again. I was working in an office sort of convenience store. After closing up, I was locking the store when my phone rang. My mom called me asking me where I had gone. Confused, I told her I was still at work. She said that I had come home 15 minutes ago. She and Dad, in the front living room, heard me come in, shout hello. They'd replied, asking why I was home early, and they said that I shouted, "So you're ignoring me." Then in a sort of jokey way, and they heard me walk upstairs, chatting on a phone with someone. My dad checked upstairs, but my room was dark, silent. My dad rushed upstairs to make sure that nobody had broken in or anything, but there was nobody around. I raced home, heart in my throat, but found nothing amiss. The back door, our usual entrance, was locked, untouched. Whatever mimicked me had vanished, leaving only questions. Another night, my mom and dad were sitting in the living room when they heard music, heard my brother practicing his guitar in his room. It was faint, familiar, a comfort, until they realized he was in university, living in student accommodation 200 miles away, and he had taken his guitars with him. They froze, the notes fading into silence, the house mocking their trust. At 22, my best friend Emma visited. My best friend was visiting while my parents were out. My friend went upstairs to use the bathroom next to my brother's bedroom, and when she came downstairs, she said, "Your brother has just shouted you for something." She was certain. Laughing, thinking I was pranking her. I asked her if she was certain that she heard him, and she was adamant. I told her my brother was at university, but she didn't believe me. She demanded that we go upstairs to see what he wanted. We climbed the stairs, her confidence fading as I opened his dark, empty room. I opened the door. The light was off, and his things weren't there, and obviously neither was he. Emma paled, her bravado gone. The house's trick sinking in, the incidents piled up, each one a thread in a tapestry of dread. I researched the house's history, digging through dusty records. Built as a manor in the 1700s, it had seen tragedy, a family lost to illness, a servant vanished without trace, whispers of a presence that lingered. Neighbors spoke of odd noises, fleeting shadows in our windows. I moved out at 24, but the house clung to me. I'd dream of its stairs, hear my name called in familiar voices that weren't real. My parents stayed, unbothered, but I wondered if they'd grown numb to it. I keep a journal now, noting every echo, every chill, afraid to forget or to remember too clearly. The house still stands, its facade unchanged, but I know it's waiting, its voices ready to call again. Whispers of the antiques, the vintage store stood like a relic in the heart of a wealthy enclave, its windows cluttered with Western artifacts that whispered of forgotten lives. Elise, a young clerk, unlocked the door one winter morning, her breath visible in the icy air. The building was old, its creaks and groans familiar, but today, an unnatural chill seeped through the walls, as if the store itself was alive. She stepped inside, the darkness swallowing her footsteps. The heater hummed, yet the cold clung to her, a presence that refused to dissipate. Elise flipped on the lights, but the shadows lingered, pooling in corners where antique saddles and rusted spurs gleamed with an eerie sheen. Downstairs, where the bulk of the store's treasures lay, the silence was oppressive. Before she could reach the switch, music blared from the speakers, shattering the quiet. Her phone, still in her pocket, hadn't been touched. The system was manual, yet it played on, unbidden, as if someone or something wanted her attention. Elise's heart raced as she turned on the lights, revealing chaos. Pillows strewn across the floor, ripped from a vintage couch. She tried to rationalize it. Maintenance, perhaps, but the air grew heavier, the store's energy shifting, as if daring her to ignore it. Then, a crash echoed from upstairs. A heavy chapstick display, untouched by human hands, flew off a shelf, scattering shards of acrylic across the marble floor. The music surged, then stopped, leaving a silence so profound it felt like a command. Elise stood frozen, realizing the store wasn't just haunted, it was watching her. I would like to preface this by saying that working at my job has completely changed my perspective on the paranormal. Elise, 23, had taken a job at a vintage store specializing in Western American artifacts, drawn to its charm and the steady pay. For context, I work at a vintage store that specializes in old antique Western American artifacts. Located in a wealthy part of the state, the store catered to affluent clients decorating their vacation homes. The store is located in a wealthy part of the state where a lot of wealthy people buy and bulk to decorate their second and third homes. Items flowed in and out constantly, each carrying a faint, indefinable energy. This means that we have a lot of sourced items being moved in and out of the store at all times. Elise wasn't involved in sourcing, only sales and management. But she felt the weight of the object's histories. I'm not part of the sourcing. By any means, I simply sell items and help manage the store, but most, if not all of the items, obviously have sort of energy attached to them. I guess not always good either. Within 3 months, she knew the store was haunted, and its spirit seemed drawn to her. Within 3 months of working there too, I knew that it was haunted, and that the resident spirits had taken a liking to me. The oddities began subtly, but grew undeniable. With the coming and going of items, certain energies and events occur and stop. To now, things were sort of weird from the beginning, I guess. But I always chalked it up to being a somewhat old building. One morning, opening alone. Elise found the store unnaturally cold. One morning I was opening the store on my own. It was the dead of winter, and everything was very dark and snowed in. But the moment that I walk in, it is absolutely freezing. She checked the heater, which was working, but its warmth faded quickly. I think that the heater conked out in the night. I go to turn it on and see that it's working perfectly fine though, and the warmth that it's emitting seems to be dissipating after a couple of feet. She ignored it and turned on the main floor lights, then headed downstairs, where vintage items filled the shadows. I ignore it and turn on the main floor lights. I walk downstairs, where it's pitch black, and this is where we keep the majority of our vintage items. Before she could light the room, the music system roared to life at full volume, though she hadn't activated it. And before I can turn on the lights, our music turns on at full blast. Problem is that the music isn't an automatic system. I mean, I control it myself from my phone, and I had yet to turn the system on. She was alone, her phone untouched. I was the only one in the building and around the general vicinity, so no one else could have turned it on from their phone. Calming her nerves, Elise turned on the lights, finding pillows scattered across the floor. After caling down from the scare, I turn on the lights to discover that all the pillows had been thrown off of our massive vintage leather couch. She blamed maintenance, tidying up. But upstairs, the lights she'd turned on were off again. The switches flipped. I clean them up, and I walk upstairs again to find that all the lights that I've just turned on have suddenly gone out. The light switches are switched off again, not just the power too. She reset them and opened the front door, flipping the open sign. Again, I ignore it and turn them on again and walk outside to open the front door and turn our open sign on. Then, a chapstick display was violently swept off a shelf, shattering on the floor, and this is the moment where I realized everything. A locally made chapstick display. A heavy thing gets completely swept off the shelf like someone aggressively pushed it off in front of me. To be clear too, it didn't fall. The shelf didn't budge. It was pushed off 100%. 50 to 100 chapsticks go flying everywhere, and the acrylic case shatters into pieces. The music surged again, then fell silent. As the computer screen flickered on, the music system suddenly starts playing the music very loudly again. And honestly, I'm just frozen in shock. Things suddenly go very quiet. Though it was as if it, or they just wanted me to finally acknowledge it. The computer screen turned on seconds later, as if it was telling me to get to work now. Elise stood frozen, overwhelmed, and I think I must have stood there for a solid 10 minutes, just frozen, not knowing what to do now. Months later, a new addition intensified the store's energy. a wall of vintage mirrors. On another occasion, and this took place around 4 months ago, our main vintage collector had brought in old vintage mirrors that he'd found in different places and constructed a wall of them on the side of the stairs going down. Elise, wary of mirrors' dark potential, felt uneasy. I came back from vacation slightly horrified. To be honest, I feel like mirrors just hold really bad energy, especially ones owned by other people before. During a normal shift, a customer's daughter screamed, claiming a shadowy figure appeared in a mirror. When the customer's daughter is walking upstairs, aka passing the mirror wall, that she suddenly screams. I, being the person in charge, run toward the scream to check on everything. This girl is inconsolable though, and claiming that she saw a shadowy figure in the mirror. The mother dismissed it, but Elise felt the familiar dread. The mom is calming her daughter, saying that it's just a shadow, sweetie, I investigate, and I don't see anything. Just the normal bad feeling that I experience passing those mirrors. Later, while removing a coat rack near the mirrors, Elise's co-worker froze, staring at a shifting figure in the glass, faceless, morphing between forms. As I'm using the drill to remove the coat rack, and my co-worker is holding the other end of the coat rack, her face suddenly pales. She's staring at the mirrors and can't look away. I see her do a double take and continue to stare at them. Obviously, I'm concerned, and finish helping this lady out immediately after. After she leaves, I return back to my coworker, who is still just staring at the mirrors. It's as if she was in a trance sort of state. I shake her out of it, and she can't speak. It's only when she said my name, and I look back at the mirrors, that I see the same figure, a morphing figure, subtly taking on different appearances. Some feminine, others masculine. No face, just features. Elise pulled her upstairs, shaken. Used to these things around here. By now, I drag her upstairs and sort of ignore it the rest of the day, though. Customers reported similar visions, one even falling ill. I heard from multiple customers about how they thought that they were seeing things in that same mirror. One girl even threw up in the bathroom because she said that she suddenly felt so sick walking downstairs. The mirror later cracked mysteriously and vanished. When I came back from my shift the next week, it was gone. My other co-worker had informed me that apparently it didn't sell. But one of the other employees walked down one day to find it cracked. I don't know what happened to it, or where it went, but the rest of the mirrors are still there. The store's spirits weren't always menacing. Some were playful, flicking lights, rearranging stuffed animals, or tampering with the thermostat. But their tricks carried an edge, as if testing Elise's resolve. One evening, as she tidied the toy section, a model train, batteryless and ancient, rolled across the floor, stopping abruptly. Elise's scream caught in her throat, but she left it untouched, sensing it was a message. Another time, a customer returned a turquoise ring, claiming it unleashed chaos in her home. Cats in distress, doors slamming, strange noises. Elise, against policy, took it back, believing her fear. The spirit's presence grew bolder when Elise's friend visited, mistaking a shadow in the back room for Elise herself. The figure moved, spoke, then vanished, leaving no trace but unease. Elise learned to coexist with the store's residents, but each incident chipped away at her skepticism, forcing her to confront a truth. The antiques held more than history. They held spirits, and they weren't letting go. The store's spirits were a mix of playful and unsettling. All of the relatively younger employees seemed to experience things too, but not as much as I do. The older employees, they don't seem to experience as much. but they agree that there are weird things that happen here. They toyed with lights, temperature, and shelves, creating harmless chaos. We also have some seemingly nice or playful resident spirits, I guess you could call them. They like to flick light switches on and off, make knocks that can't be blamed on the building, play with the building's temperature, and mess with items on shelves and all that. Occasionally, they like to make messes and play tricks too, throwing pillows off couches, jelly cat. Stuffed animals being rearranged in the night make sounds to scare people, and sometimes switch the music playing and play with the volume levels too. Generally, things that happen here are harmless. The security cameras often glitched, despite repeated checks, not to mention that they love to play with our security camera system too. But we've had the cameras and the electricals looked at 1,000,000 times, and they all work fine. But things will stop recording and cut out all the time. One night, cleaning up, Elise heard a noise in the toy section. In any case, on another occasion, I was approaching the end of my shift, which means cleaning up and organizing the store for the next day employees. I clean up our vintage toy area and walk behind the shelves to organize our vintage Levi jeans rack. I hear a clatter and go to investigate, thinking that something had just fallen over. A toy train, upright but old, moved on its own across the floor. So I walk over to the toy corner and see a knocked-over toy train standing up. Though, which was a bit weird. This thing doesn't run on batteries or anything. It's super old, but I watch as it starts moving at a moderate pace out of the corner and into the next aisle section. Once again, it's just a model train. No strings, no batteries, no track. Nothing. It stops after about maybe 6-ish feet of movement. Elise left it, unnerved, and later returned it to the shelf. After my initial internal screaming, I decide to leave it there. For whatever is moving it, I hesitantly ignore it and go back to cleaning no more sound or movement. And right before I close up, I put the train back on the shelf. A customer once returned a turquoise ring, claiming it caused disturbances at home. On another occasion, I sold a customer an old turquoise, sort of Native American ring. It was on sale, so no returns. A week later, she calls though and begs for a return. She drives literally an hour back to the store and says that she doesn't want the ring anymore. She described chaos, cats acting strangely, noises, doors closing, but then she goes on to say that things have been so weird in her house since she bought it. She said that her cats were acting up. The house was making weird noises and doors were closing on their own. Elise, trusting her fear, made an exception. I wasn't supposed to take it back due to policy and all that. But we worked something out in the end. I mean, she seemed so frantic sometimes. You think someone is making something up to get their money back, as it happens in retail. But genuinely, she seemed really scared, and based on my experiences working at my job, I didn't doubt her either. The ring was resold without issue. Nothing happened in particular after we got the ring back. Luckily, it was sold a little bit later to a collector, and we didn't hear anything after that. But still, it was a weird situation. A friend's visit brought another eerie encounter. Now, this story is not my own. It's actually my friend's who was visiting at the time she came to visit me at work. She wanted to try on some vintage clothing, so she goes into the dressing room to try it on. While Elise assisted a customer, her friend saw a shadow resembling Elise in the back room, moving and responding. While she's doing that, I go into the next room over to show a customer the bathroom. But when I come back, my friend is sort of shocked to see me walk back into the main shop area. She looks back behind the counter, and then back at me. Sort of confused, I can tell that she's processing something. She asks, "Were you not in the back room just now?" And I'm confused. seeing as I wasn't. And my coworker left early, so. My friend is a very practical human being. She has to see it to believe it, sort of thing. That's her philosophy anyway. But she then goes on to explain that the back row door, which is slightly visible to the customers, was halfway closed. And she said that there was a shadow matching my height and size, making noise back there. And moving around, she said that she thought that I was back there, grabbing items. She said that she thought that she heard me respond and say, "Aha," too at one point. Mind you, nobody else was back there, and no other customers had come in at that point. Elise found nothing amiss, but her friend was shaken. When I went to take a look, the figure back there, or whatever it was now long gone. Nothing seemed out of place, but she was absolutely convinced that I must have been back there anyway. The store reshaped Elise's worldview, leaving her open to the unseen. These are just some of the experiences from this place. And like I said, this place has changed my perspective on things for good. And I don't think I'll ever be the same after working here. She continued working, navigating the spirit's whims. But each encounter deepened her awareness of the energies bound to the antiques, a legacy she could never unlearn. The midnight stranger. The street was a silent void, the neighborhood swallowed by night. My cigarette's glow, a lone beacon. I was outside of my mother's house close to midnight. It's dark in the neighborhood. Nobody is outside, and it's quiet. I leaned against my car, music low, the air cool against my skin. I'm smoking by my car, just listening to music and vibing pretty quietly. The city slept, its pulse faint, each exhale a cloud in the chill. Then, a figure emerged, moving up the street, a silhouette against the dark. I see a person walking up the street towards me. Nothing to be alarmed about. She drew closer, her steps soft, her face catching the streetlight. Mid-30s, striking, her smile disarming. She gets close. She's a cute mid-30s woman, sees me smoking, and asks if I have a cigarette. My pulse quickened, a fleeting fantasy sparked by her approach. Every young man has fantasies of a cute woman walking towards them, looking for something right. "Got a cigarette?" she asked, her voice warm, almost playful. She was friendly enough, but I say no. Unfortunately, I don't. I shook my head, apologetic. "Sorry, I'm out." Her eyes held mine, a spark of something I couldn't place. The night suddenly heavier, her smile lingered. A mask I couldn't read. The night's quiet now, a weight pressing on my chest. We have a bit of a nice quick chat. We talked, brief and easy, her charm pulling me in despite my caution. I mean, you never know, but definitely just a flirty at this point, and wishful thinking. She laughed, mentioning her life in the neighborhood. Her words light, but her gaze sharp. During our quick chat, probably only a minute or so, she says, "One moment, let me take this call." Then, her phone buzzed, and she stepped back, answering with a hushed tone. She calls her husband, I guess. Don't recall how I knew that, but it was her husband, I believe. "Honey," she whispered, her voice shifting. "My goodness, I think I found one," she says on the phone quietly, sort of under her breath. "Hi, honey, oh my goodness, I think I found one." The words hit like ice, her excitement laced with something dark, sinister. She was excited about it, but in a sort of weird way, hard to explain, but it definitely sounded sinister. Found what? I'd said no to the cigarette. My skin prickled. The street too empty. Her call a signal I didn't understand. Her eyes flicked to me, her smile unchanged. But now it felt wrong. predatory. The night turned hostile, her words a blade hidden in her smile, my instincts screaming to flee. It creeped me out and gave me red flags immediately. I stood frozen, her phone call echoing in my mind. Found one. Found what? Plus, I'm thinking, found what I already said, that I didn't have a cigarette. The street was a trap, its silence a cloak for her intent. Plus, she was just walking around the streets. She and her husband are looking for something. What does that even mean? Right? Was she scouting for her husband? A robbery? Something worse? I don't know what to think of it to this day. What could she have meant? Her voice, low and eager, replayed, each syllable a warning I couldn't ignore. It definitely sounded sinister. I glanced at my car, the house, calculating my escape. While she was still on the phone, I just turned around and went inside, and I locked the door. I moved, quick but quiet, slipping into the house, the deadbolt clicking like a gunshot. I locked the door, really. Inside. I peered through the curtain, her figure still there, phone to ear, her head turning toward the house. The night swallowed her as she walked away, but her words stayed. A riddle I couldn't solve. The locked door was my shield, but her words haunted me. A puzzle with edges too sharp. I don't know what to think of it to this day. I sat in the dark, my mother's house too quiet, the cigarette forgotten. What could she have meant? Was it harmless? A flirty game? A misunderstood invitation? Best case is that she wanted like a three-way with her husband or something which I'm not into at all. Or was it darker? A plan to rob, harm, or worse? Worst case is that they were going to rob me or do something awful and weird. I replayed her tone, excited, secretive, the street's emptiness a stage for their scheme. She was excited about it, but in a sort of weird way, hard to explain. I checked the locks, my phone, debating a call to the police. But what would I say? What do you think a deal was? Do you think that I overreacted? Or was it a good call in the end? A woman asked for a cigarette, said something odd, too vague, too thin. I searched online, forums for nighttime encounters, finding tales of lures, traps, couples hunting. Her face, her voice, lingered, a warning I'd carry. My trust in the night forever changed. The night's shadow lingered, her words a ghost in my mind. The street forever changed. What do you think a deal was? Do you think that I overreacted? Or was it a good call in the end? I avoided that corner, its silence a warning. My nights now cautious. I don't know what to think of it to this day. Her voice, excited, sinister, replayed. A puzzle I'd never solve. What could she have meant? I shared my story online. Forums buzzing with tales of nighttime lures, couples hunting. Best case is that she wanted like a three-way with her husband or something. Some called me paranoid. Others praised my instincts. Worst case is that they were going to rob me or do something awful and weird. I locked my doors tighter. Her face a lesson. Trust the night at your peril. The shadow at the bed's end. The new house was too big, its rooms echoing with a silence that felt alive, watching us from the shadows. My family, mom, stepdad, my older sister Lila, and I left our cramped old place for a rental in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. My family, mom, stepdad, older sister and I moved into a rental home in a nice neighborhood within our small town. It was a sprawling 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, a luxury compared to before. It was a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house and was way bigger than the house that we came from. Though I finally had my own room, Lila and I chose to share one, our twin bed tucked in a corner, a comfort against the house's strange vastness. Even though I finally had my own room, my sister and I decided to continue sharing a room and a bed. We both felt uneasy. The new space too open, too unfamiliar. I think we both felt a bit weird in the new home. Mom thought it was just habit, that we'd grow out of it. My mom just figured that we'd shared a room for so many years that we were comfortable and would eventually grow out of it. But the house had a presence, its walls holding secrets that made sleep uneasy, its quiet a prelude to something unseen. The room we shared wasn't just ours, it belonged to something else, a shadow that waited for us to close our eyes. Our bed was pressed against the wall, Lila sleeping by the inside, me on the outside, exposed to the dark. The way our room was set up was our bed was in the corner of the room against the wall, and my sister, she slept close to the inside against the wall, and I slept on the outside. An oscillating fan hummed at our feet, its breeze a soft rhythm. We had an oscillating fan against the wall that aimed toward our feet. Across the hall was the bathroom, its door always creaking. Just outside of our door was the hall with the bathroom right across the hall. One night, I woke without reason, a chill urging my eyes open. One night, my sister woke up to use the bathroom, and for some reason I felt the need to wake up. I looked toward my feet, and there, at the bed's end, stood a silhouette, dark as a void, shaped like Lila. Standing there at the foot of the bed, closest to my side, was a dark silhouette of my sister. It was featureless, a black absence where a face should be, unmoving despite the fan's breeze. I couldn't make out any facial features as it was just a dark, dark void of a silhouette, standing still there. The shadow wasn't just still, it was wrong. Its silence a scream that drowned out the fan's hum. I stared, my heart pounding, the fan's blades visible behind it, but the figure's hair didn't stir. I could see the fan rotating from behind her, but noticed the strands of her hair didn't move once the wind hit us. I whispered Lila's name, expecting her to turn, but got no response. I called her name and got no response. I called again, louder, my voice trembling, but the shadow remained frozen. Called her name again and again, but there was no answer or movement. Then I glanced at the hallway. The bathroom door was shut, light seeping beneath it. When I looked out into the hallway, I saw the bathroom door closed, and the light in the bathroom was on. The door creaked open, and Lila stepped out, her face sleepy but real. As soon as the bathroom door opened, it was gone, and my sister walked into the room. The shadow vanished, leaving only the fan's hum and my racing pulse. I was absolutely terrified and began crying. I sobbed, fear overwhelming me, as Lila climbed into bed, soothing me until sleep took me. My sister came in and made sure that I was okay, and eventually I must have fallen asleep. The terror of that night etched itself into my memory, a scar that never faded, its details sharp even years later, even that young. I remembered the experience the next day, and it would stick with me. For all lazy is, Lila brushed it off as a bad dream, but I knew it wasn't. The shadow had been too real, its presence too deliberate. The next morning, I noticed scratches on the floor by the bed's end, thin and jagged, as if something had stood there, marking its claim. I didn't tell Mom or Stepdad, fearing their dismissal, but I began sleeping with a flashlight, its beam a frail defense against the dark. The house continued its tricks, creaking floors, whispers in empty rooms. a hum that seemed to come from the walls. Lila admitted she felt it too, a weight in the air that made her cling to me at night. The scratches remained, a silent reminder of the shadow's visit, and I wondered if it was tied to the house, to us, or to something older, something that had waited for new tenants to claim. We stayed in that house longer than we should, the shadow's memory a constant companion, its absence more unsettling than its presence. I never saw it again, but the house never let us forget it was alive. Doors would open slightly, the fan would stop mid-oscillation, and once, I found a single black thread on my pillow, too coarse to be human hair. Lila and I grew apart as we aged, but that night bound us, a shared secret we rarely spoke of. When we moved, the scratches stayed behind, but the fear followed, a whisper in quiet moments. The house was rented to others, but none stayed long, its reputation spreading in hushed tones. I drive by it sometimes, its windows dark, and feel the shadow's gaze, a void that knows my name, waiting for me to return to the bed's end, where it still stands, silent and eternal. The thing beneath the bed. I was a 9.5-year-old boy. It was a bright summer day, the kind that made you feel invincible, like nothing could touch you. But that day, something did. I'd just stepped out of the shower, towel around my waist, water dripping onto the hardwood floor of the bedroom I shared with my parents. The air felt wrong, too still, too heavy, like the room was holding its breath. I shrugged it off, humming to myself, ready to pick out clothes and enjoy the day. Then I felt it, a vibration, faint at first, pulsing through the floor like a heartbeat. It wasn't the house settling or a passing truck. It came from somewhere close, somewhere in the room, and it was growing stronger. I went into my bedroom, which I shared with my parents. I was picking out clothes, and nobody was in the room with me. The vibrations intensified, a rhythmic thud that seemed to come from my parents' bed. Almost as soon as I walked in, though, I could feel the ground vibrating, which was weird. I tried to ignore it, grabbing a pair of shorts from the dresser. As I picked clothes, I felt the vibration was coming from behind me around my parents' bed. It pulsed in waves, each stronger than the last, like something was trying to break through. My heart started racing, the happy summer vibe replaced by a creeping dread. I pulled on my shorts, t-shirt in hand, and turned to face the bed. It went on and off like a cycle, almost. But each time the vibration came back stronger. The bed frame rattled, its legs scraping against the floor. I put on my shorts and, with t-shirt in my hand, I turned around to see what was going on. The sight froze me. It was exactly as I imagined. My parents' bed was shaking for no discernible reason, and it seemed to be coming from underneath. The shaking grew violent, knocking books off the nightstand. Then, silence. So sudden, it felt like the world had stopped. I held my breath, staring at the gap beneath the bed. Something was there, moving, unfolding itself from the shadows. A shape emerged, blacker than night, blacker than anything I'd ever seen. I saw this weird creature crawling out from underneath the bed, about a meter or two away. It was humanoid, but wrong, flat, almost two-dimensional, with long limbs that bent at odd angles. It was pure black, the blackest thing that I've ever seen in my life. Its edges seemed to blur, like it was pulling the light into itself. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. As it rose to my height, its faceless head turning slowly. It didn't see me at first, its movements jerky, like a puppet with half its strings cut. Then its head snapped toward me, and I felt its fear, a raw, electric panic that mirrored my own. We stared at each other for what felt like an eternity, but was maybe a fraction of a second. The thing's eyeless face seemed to ripple, as if it was trying to understand me. Then, without even moving one bit or making any noise, it just disappeared from my existence, like it just blinked out of existence. My legs gave out, and I stumbled back, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Obviously, I was terrified. I ran out of the room and I told my parents. They rushed in, checking under the bed, in the closet, finding nothing. In the end, I don't know if they believed me or not. I could barely believe it myself, but I knew what I'd seen wasn't a dream or a trick of the light. It was real, and it didn't belong here. I couldn't sleep in that room for weeks. Every creak, every shadow made me jump. I started researching, digging through old books at the library, looking for anything that matched what I'd seen. A librarian, an old man with thick glasses, told me about tears in reality, places where the fabric of the world was thin, letting things slip through. He said our house, built on an old farm, might sit on such a spot. The idea stuck with me, gnawing at my mind. What if that thing wasn't a creature but a glimpse of something from another plane, caught here by mistake? The vibrations never returned, but the house felt different. At night, I'd hear faint scratches, like claws on wood, coming from under the bed. I'd check, flashlight in hand, but find nothing. I found a mark on the floor, a faint, scorched outline where the thing had been. I didn't tell my parents. They'd already started looking at me like I was losing it. But I knew the truth. That thing, whatever it was, had seen me, and I'd seen it. And somehow, that moment had left a crack in my world that never fully closed. Years later, we moved out, and I tried to forget, but I couldn't. I kept a journal, sketching what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it. The librarian's words echoed. A tear in reality. I found stories online, other kids, other houses, other sightings of things that didn't belong. Some called them shadow people, others said they were interdimensional. I started noticing small things after we left. A flicker in my peripheral vision, a hum in the air when I was alone. I burned the journal, hoping to sever the connection. But some nights, I still feel that vibration, faint and unmistakable, like it's reaching after me across dim space. The house is long gone, torn down for a new development, but I wonder if the thing is still there, waiting in the dark for the next kid to see it. Thank you for listening till the end. Tomas, if you hear a knock at 3 a.m. tonight, don't answer it. Maybe the next story is coming. Symbiotes for you. See you the same in your next nightmare.